Hello, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Council of the Town of Oakville for Monday, June 22nd, 2020. And as we have been for 3 months or so, this is a virtual meeting thanks to COVID-19. Present via video conference are all of the members of council, and you're probably able to see them on your screen. Council, I invite you and all members of the public to join in O Canada. Thank you, everybody. We have no regrets, Madam Clerk. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I do not see any. If you're watching the live stream of our meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to an item on our agenda, please call 905-815-6095. When you call in, you'll be placed in a virtual waiting room, and when I poll for delegations, you will press *9 on your phone's keypad to raise your hand, advising us that you wish to speak. This information is also posted on your screen below the live stream on oakville.ca. Council, are you satisfied with the minutes of the previous council meetings listed in the agenda? I guess you are. Councillor Grant is moving confirmation. May I have a seconder? Councillor Longo, thank you. Is there any objection to the minutes as presented? Madam Clerk, the minutes are carried and approved. So now, there are no public presentations. There is a standing committee report from the Budget Committee dated June 16th. Is there a mover and seconder for that report? Councillor Chisholm, thank you for the motion. Is there a seconder? Councillor Adams, thank you. Is there an objection to adopting the report? Madam Clerk, the report is adopted. We now turn to the public hearing item on this agenda. This is a public meeting and recommendation report for a town-initiated accessory patios zoning bylaw amendment for all lands south of Dundas Street and north of Highway 407. We have a presentation by Brandon Hassan, our planner, and there's been a resolution from the Bronte BIA distributed in association with this, if I understand my notes here. Thank you, Madam Clerk. So I'll just remind you, if there's anyone watching the live stream of this meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you to the meeting. Council, we'll now pause for a few minutes to allow any members of the public to call in. While we wait, are there any questions or comments by you, the members of council? Councillor O'Meara. Please unmute yourself. There we go.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'd like to thank staff for this. I do have two questions. With regards to the 4.18.1, where a patio is not permitted in any yard abutting a residential zone, I'm just wondering, half of the Brawny Village area abuts a residential zone. So are we right off the top saying that none of that half area in the business corridor will be allowed to have a patio or a rooftop terrace?
Who's going to take the,
Brandon.
oh, Brandon, thank you. Mr. Hassan, I guess we need to unmute you somehow.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. In relation to the question from the councillor, the predominant location of the accessory patios would be in relation to the restaurants that are permitted within the mixed-use zones. So you're correct that we would have to take a look at where the patios are actually being proposed in relation to those residential properties.
Okay, but that's not what I'm reading in the bylaw. I'm reading it says it will not be permitted, not that town will take a look at it. So it doesn't seem like there's flexibility for the town to take a look at it the way that it's written in front of me here.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess in relation to other options and alternatives on the site itself where those patios could be permitted. If there's another area within the zone designation that is permitted, that's where staff would advise that the patio should be permitted.
Okay, so it's not that it's not permitted anywhere on the property. It's not permitted on the property that's adjacent to the residential property. Is that how I'm supposed to be reading this?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, that'd be correct.
Okay. Well, and then the second part of that is the rooftop terrace aspect, because no matter where you put the rooftop terrace, it's going to be in a place that might be visible to there. What was our thinking with that? We just don't ever want to have somebody on a rooftop terrace being able to look into a residential property? Is that the understanding?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, that was my understanding through the formulation of the bylaw and discussion with internal staff. It's the privacy overlook and any sort of noise related to the patios on abutting properties.
Okay, I just think we're, we can't have fencing, we can't have decorative stuff that goes up the back that adjoins to the residential properties. We can also have, at 4 o'clock they close. I mean, there's a bunch of ways that we can be creative. I just don't know if I agree with a carte blanche, thank you for coming, go away. A lot of these places are going to be transforming. Kerr Street on both sides of it will have no chance for rooftop patios because they all back onto, well, for the most part, onto residential areas. So I just don't know. I just don't know if we have the flexibility built in here that we might want a little bit down the road. But I'll leave that first part to you guys. The second part is the B area, which is how the patio is considered floor area and net floor area when calculating the parking requirements. How do we do that when there would be seasonal? So do all of a sudden we expect the property to grow if they put a seasonal patio up, or we limit them? How are we gonna ask them to have more parking spaces when they set up a patio, but then they don't need those parking spaces when a patio is not there?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, my understanding is, again, through the calculation of floor area as defined in the bylaw, that's where the parking regulations would kick in. And my understanding is that the town has instituted reduced parking fees to a degree for the patios that are being made in those parking spaces, specifically within the road allowance.
Okay, so going forward, and I'm not talking about the community recovery initiative we have now, but going forward, if somebody wants to put a patio up in their private parking space in the back, they will have to show that they have more parking to cover that floor area.
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, that'd be correct. They want to show that they're not deficient in parking.
Okay. So we're already having problems with deficiency in parking as it exists now. So we're almost basically telling people don't bother applying for a patio unless you have a ginormous surplus of parking right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, again, that's my understanding in terms of how staff have analyzed where these patios would be most appropriate in terms of their location on the sites. Because there are situations where it is suitable to use parking spaces for the patios. Again, we just don't want there to be deficiencies, as you noted.
Okay, I'll leave it for now, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Mr. Barry is at the podium. Mr. Barry, perhaps, did you want to add something to Mr. Hassan's answer?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I just did want to add that I think the piece to this is the bylaw as it's laid out wasn't intended to take away required parking. If there was an overall look at required parking, if that was the intent, we could go back and take a look at that. But this bylaw was to provide opportunities where it existed, as opposed to reduce the required parking that's there now. So this is probably one of those interim fixes. As we go forward, we can look at a larger review to see if that's something that's warranted or required.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I can understand in sort of, areas maybe outside of BIA areas where no matter what, we're limited on parking. I just see that this limits BIA areas and their ability to have patio spaces as opposed to areas outside of the BIA, whether they're plazas or sorts of things which could accommodate this. But BIAs, for the most part, will not be able to abide by what we've got written down here the way that I'm understanding it. So I'm not sure where we go from there, but I appreciate your comments.
Councillor Chisholm, please unmute yourself.
I would echo Councillor O'Meara's comments with respect to the parking issue. It's kind of counterintuitive if we're having the ability to expand on the patios, which fall into or encroach onto parking stalls or spaces, and now we have to calculate if we have enough parking. It just seems so counterintuitive. So I would agree with Councillor O'Meara. Maybe we need to rewrite that those sections a little bit, have a little bit more clarity on that. Thank you.
Mr. Barry, can I call you back to the podium? I'm getting the idea that council perceives that this proposed bylaw is cutting back on patio opportunities. And of course, what we've done is tried to increase patio opportunities. Can you bring any clarity to that concern?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll certainly give it a try. I think the intent with this bylaw was to do exactly that. Right now, the opportunity doesn't exist. The intent is to provide that opportunity in a measured way. As Mr. Hassan has indicated, there are some considerations that we've built into the bylaw. Certainly, there are noise considerations. There are other intrusion type considerations when you look at the rooftops. When we look at parking, in most cases, buildings are required or establishments are required to have a specific amount of parking. This bylaw doesn't take that away. Certainly in the interim, we do have a bylaw that has allowed that as we go through COVID. We can get some learning experience as we go forward, and that will form any type of amendment that we want to make in the future if that's required.
So, Mr. Barry, just to clarify, this bylaw doesn't take away, if I heard you correctly, the ability to use some of their designated parking for patio expansions. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, right now, it certainly does not.
Councillor O'Meara and Councillor Chisholm, does that help you any with the matter? Councillor O'Meara?
I understand what Commissioner Barry is saying, but I'm just, when I read that, it says the designation for a patio shall be considered a floor area where net floor area when calculating the parking requirements of this bylaw. So what it means is if a business right now is right at its capacity with parking space and floor area, they would not be able to have a patio. And I don't know if Commissioner Barry said the opposite, but the way I read it, if they have surplus parking, go ahead, have a patio. If they don't have surplus parking, they can't add a patio. That's what I'm reading.
And Your Worship, that's exactly the case with respect to it. It's very black and white with respect to the comments made in the report. If I would assume that staff would not interpret it, they would look at this as exact black and white, and it would be a hindrance to our restaurateurs.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I could try and help out again. Certainly, at this point, we are allowing businesses to operate in required parking spaces. We are with the existing bylaw, not this bylaw, but the COVID response bylaw that we have. So that exists now. This bylaw is intended to be a go forward. This bylaw will help businesses that don't right now have the opportunity for patios. And again, I think what we want to do is gain some experience as we go forward with this. And if changes are required, we can look at those in the future.
Councillor O'Meara?
Yeah, I have no problem supporting this. I would just maybe ask then if we could put a third recommendation that maybe fall 2021 staff report back on the proposed bylaw. So we just might not have to wait 3 or 4 years if we see hiccups coming back. So if we could get a recommendation to report back on interim usage and things like that next year, I'd be happy to support the recommendation.
Councillor O'Meara, I'll take that and Councillor Chisholm's second as an amendment to the item. May I put the vote on the amendment? Is there any objection to the amendment? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The amendment carries. Councillor Haslett-Deal, you had a hand up. Please unmute yourself.
My question was more just for clarity. So the COVID response is allowing the patios today, but some of the language, even at the podium, we're talking about not having the opportunity now. So really what you're saying is not having the opportunity outside of the COVID response time period. Do I understand that correct? It truly isn't limiting anybody that the first patio bylaw that we passed earlier this year is what is allowing that expansion of the patios for the purposes of COVID.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
I just got to, okay, thank you.
All right, any others? If not, could I have a mover and seconder for the, Madam Clerk, are there any delegations on this?
No.
There are no delegations. May I have a mover and seconder for the report? Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Giddings. Any objection to the report? Madam Clerk,
Mr. Mayor, I have one point of order, if I may.
Sorry.
In relation to the proposed amendment for section 418.12 of the bylaw, there's been a slight change to the wording. Previously, when the notice was circulated and published in the mail and in the Beaver, the patios on public lands has changed now to patios on town-owned lands. That was just to grant additional flexibility for where the patios can be located.
All right. Thank you. Noted. Any objection to the report? Madam Clerk, there's no objection and the report is adopted. Thank you, everybody. We now have a confidential consent item. If you need to go into camera for this, we'll move it to the end of the meeting so that we don't disturb the streaming of the meeting on YouTube. If you're happy with the report, all I need is a motion to move it and a seconder, and we have delegations to hear from. So just for housekeeping, can I get a move? Councillor Haslett-Deal, are you moving it? I'm looking for a motion. Councillor Adams, seconded by Councillor O'Meara. And now speakers. Or would you like to hear delegations? Councillor Haslett-Deal.
I'd like to move in camera to talk about matters that are related to legal and personnel on this item.
Well, then we'll have to move it to the end of the meeting. All right.
Did you hear the delegations?
Yes?
No?
Yes. So as a courtesy to the delegations, we'll hear them now and act on it later. Councillor Adams.
Well, thank you. That's what I was going to suggest.
Thank you for the suggestion. Madam Clerk, would you call the first delegation?
Yes, we have representing the Oakville Soccer Club, Abbas Canoe, Petra Hainberry, Andrew Doman, and Kate Svoboda. Available for delegation.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and councillors. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for allowing us to speak to you this afternoon. As always, we appreciate the support that we've received over the years from our mayor and council. I am Abbas Kanu. I'm president and board chair of the Oakville Soccer Club at Pine Glen Road. With me today representing the OSC are Petra Hannaberry, who's the treasurer and chair of the Oakville Soccer Club Finance Committee, Andrew Doman, who's a past treasurer and is still a finance committee member, and Kate Svoboda, who's the board vice chair. We have asked for time on the agenda today to expand on a letter and financial overview that we previously provided and which are in PowerPoint materials for the meeting today. Similar to many other businesses in the town of Oakville, we have been very seriously affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and related measures that have been taken to keep everyone safe. Our basic ask is for a deferral of payment of the licensing fee that the Oakville Soccer Club pays to the town, which is $71,313.24 every month, is to ask for deferral of that payment for at least 5 months. And we'll expand on that in the 10 minutes or so that we have. To set the stage for the financial picture, basically on March 13th, when the pandemic measures started in earnest, we had to shut down immediately. On the Friday of that week, when we got instructions from our provincial governing body, we literally had to shut down players on the field that evening, and no one has been back since, either indoor or outdoors. What does this mean for us? At the moment, we have no revenue, we have no competitive program, we have no recreational program, we have no camps ongoing. We also have a high number of refunds that we're processing and continue to process as we speak. So that's the setting for this request. Again, in my capacity as chair, I do want to thank your worship and councillors for all your assistance over the years. And at this point, I will hand over to Petra Hannaberry, who will give you more of the points on the finances in detail.
Thank you very much, sir, for your presentation. We look forward to the rest of the information.
Okay, so I'll hand over to Petra. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. As Abbas indicated, my name is Petra Hannaberry, and I am chair of the Finance Committee as well as treasurer of Oakville Soccer Club. I just want to kind of go into a little bit more details around what Abbas said, just to frame the cost for you. So typically, revenues for our club, for the annual revenues, are about $7 million, and expenses are about $7 million on an annual basis. We are a not-for-profit club, so looking back on the years, we have run anywhere from about, this year was projected to run about a $65,000 surplus to, we've had, a very small deficit of around $20,000 a couple of years ago. So typically, as a not-for-profit club, you would expect that we manage our revenues and our expenses quite tightly. Generally, what we're feeling, obviously, right now is with having no revenue coming in, we have had to fully cancel our summer house league program and obviously have refunded all of the programs from May 13th onwards. We have also laid off the majority of our staff. We have kept a small contingent of staff to ensure that the facility maintains what we need to maintain from an insurance perspective, communication to members, and of course, maintaining our current financial outlays. So essentially, we are right now running about $130,000 a month are our fixed expenses with no revenues coming in. We do have, thankfully, a $930,000 restricted reserve that is actually intended to be used for the replacement of the turf next year. You can simply do the math. At the rate that we're going, we will deplete that reserve in about 7 months. We do have unrestricted liabilities of about $1.4 million. The bulk of those have been allocated for refunds. So essentially, I think that this explains the picture. If you were to grant our payment deferral request today, that would allow us to ensure that when we are able to return to play, we are, actively in talking with Ontario Soccer as well as all provincial and municipal governing bodies around soccer to understand what return to play looks like. We are anticipating a return to play of some description in the fall, and potentially some of the competitive training may be able to start sooner. However, numbers will be much smaller, and we will need to really understand how that will impact our financial picture. I will pause there to see if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hannaberry. Council, do you have questions for Ms. Hannaberry? Ms. Hannaberry, you've apparently been sufficiently clear. No questions are showing.
Thank you. So I will turn it over to Kate just in closing, and we thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. And thank you, Council. We really appreciate any support you can give us in this manner. It really is about not just our short-term survival, but also the long-term survival of a club that is very important to the community and has a number of members all across Oakville, both adult and youth. So we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you very much. Do you have another member of your delegation, or is that it? Okay. Council, have you any other questions? All right, let me ask, just in case the information presented has resolved any concerns, is it still any councillor's wish to move the decision on the item to the end of the meeting in order to go into camera? In that case, thank you, Councillor Hazlett-Thiel. Is there a mover and a seconder for the proposal? I saw Councillor Duddick first, and I saw Councillor Knoll second. Thank you, everybody. Before I call the vote, I will say that I will support the measure myself.
Your Worship, I will defer to Councillor Elgar and Longo, who are the ward councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Duddick. And thank you, Councillor Knoll. It's now moved by Councillors Elgar and Longo. And I just want to say, before we call the vote, that I'll be supporting it because the town and the soccer club have a highly valued partnership that has done outstandingly well. In previous bad times, you've pulled through. And we have complete faith, and I have complete faith and confidence in you. And I believe after the votes are tallied, you will see that everyone else probably does too. With that, are there any objections to the measure?
Your Worship, can I ask for a recorded vote?
Yes, Councillor, we will record every member present as supporting the vote by name in the minutes because no one objected. And thank you very much to the Oakville Soccer Club for the partnership that we've had behind us, and I know will last for a very long time in front of us. And congratulations to you on your success to date. We will work with you in every way we can to make sure you continue to be the outstanding success that you have been.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much, councillors. We do appreciate this and appreciate your trust in us, and look forward to working with you for many years to come.
Thank you, sir. All right, council, we are now we're moving now, council, to we have to go back. Council, we need to revise the motion on item 1 at the request of legal to include the phrase that no further notice is required. That's a standard part of these resolutions that was inadvertently dropped. So, Madam Clerk, who was the, we'll keep the same mover and seconder presumably unless there's an objection. And is there any objection to including those words? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. Legal has their wish. Council, we now turn to our first discussion item, and that is the COVID-19 update, the verbal update from the Acting Chief Administrative Officer, Jane Closey. CAO Closey, we look forward to your report.
Mayor and members of council, I think this is the third, perhaps even the fourth update that we've provided to council through this just over 100 days of the COVID pandemic. The purpose of the presentation is really to provide you an update on the status, not only of the town activities, but also the assistance and support we've provided to you as a council actually have provided to all of the community and the businesses. We certainly take the advice of the public health. Our place is not to provide the advice, certainly on the public health. That is a provincial and a regional role. But we take that advice we hear from the federal, provincial, and the regional public health officials and use it then in terms of providing for that protection of the health and safety of not only staff within the town, but whatever services we can provide to the public as a whole. So let me move the slides. So just giving you the current status of the COVID-19 cases that are here. You can see on the screen where we are at this point in time. Halton has 794 cases with Oakville at 268. In terms of the overall trend of the virus, the next slide is a slide that I had shown the last time at the last council meeting. It is a rolling, the blue line on here is a 5-day rolling average of the number of cases in Ontario as a whole. And I think the last time I was here was the May 22nd or near the end of May. And the line was still quite fluctuating. You can definitely see a decline in the chart that's here. I think over the last 8 days, over the last 9 days, 8 of those we were less than 200 cases within the province of Ontario. In fact, today it was 161 new cases. In Halton, we have 18 active cases with that 5-year rolling average that I spoke of for all of Ontario at about 175. So compared to the well over 400 and almost up to 600 cases that we had in mid-April, we're doing very, very well, and it certainly is a testament to the community as a whole in terms of the actions they've taken in terms of curbing the overall sprawl of the disease or virus. So the medical officer of health has given continual advice to us over the time period. As you know, the congregation limits increased from 5 up to 10. And they have still the advice of staying at home where possible, avoiding crowds, but certainly washing your hands, coughing into your sleeve, and keeping that physical distance of 2 meters is the advice they have. And they also have now added social circles, so it enables you to expand the number of people that you see on a regular basis to no more than 10, but adding other members of your family or friends into that circle. So This chart is actually up on the Halton website, so it gives you a good explanation of what those social circles are meaning and the new advice that they've been providing. So in terms of the provincial action, the province announced their action plan quite a number of weeks ago now. Of course, the first phase was protect and support. We have moved on to phase 2, which is the restart of the community or the services within our communities, and that has 3 stages to it. We were in the last 2 weeks, we were still in the stage 1, and as of Friday, as many of you know, we've moved to stage 2. So that certainly allows a lot of the businesses to open and a lot of more services to come on available from the town. So we don't know when stage 3 will occur, but we'll be moving towards that. And that was, as the province has framed it, the restart. And then beyond that will be the overall recovery as we again build up to our new normal, I think is the best way to describe it. So the Friday opening certainly delivered on the business services. We welcome that coming back in. The restaurants can now move outside of just the takeout. As you've heard from the patio discussion, they can move into patios and providing a lot more services to the public. And to have that available this particular weekend, I think was very delightful, but just because of the weather and the ability to sit out on the patios. We as staff processed 60 patio applications throughout the town, so you'll see lots of them, and I think there are a few more applications that we're still looking at. So of course, other businesses that have opened up were the personal service shops, mostly the hairdressers and those types of things. Dental and other healthcare services have opened up, and shopping malls now as well. So there really was a change in the opportunities for you to visit businesses since Friday. Also on this council agenda is a report from the mayor on the economic task force. It identifies the various initiatives that task force has undertaken in order to support businesses. The symbols at the bottom of the screen are all the members of that group, and they have been very effective in their advocacy efforts with all levels of government. In terms of the process of reopening town services, the province's general approach has been in the last while that on Mondays they provide us a provincial update. I actually haven't heard yet what they have updated today. Then they, by about Wednesday, we get the orders themselves in terms of the specifics and the detail. And then by Friday, they've been lifting those restrictions. So from a town perspective and under our town's recovery framework, we are then quite busy between the Monday and the Friday with a return to service review. We have a cross-departmental return to service team that undertakes both an operational and financial analysis to really understand how that service can open up and operate in a safe way for the participants in that program. The return to service has to anticipate any congregation limits, what type of contact, and how that service can really be delivered. I do need to emphasize that we actually begin the process of our service review much before the Monday when the province may be thinking of opening up a service. We have, at this point in time, looked through all the services that the town provides, getting ourselves in a ready state in order to, when they do announce it, that we're then able to open those services. It is, though, quite often the guidelines that come out on Wednesday that really give us a good understanding of what we need to put in place to deliver that service successfully. So at the end of the day, we do need to wait for those orders in order to make sure that we can meet those requirements. So also on the agenda is the recovery report from the mayor. And that report, the last report you'd seen set out of the overall recovery framework. This report provides a return to service a review that we would be undertaking. And it is a playbook. Now the playbook is really setting out what are the requirements that we as a town would want to put in place in order to operate safely within our offices, what's the protocols that we need to put in place. So this playbook is used in combination with the return to service so that we can look at all those aspects together in order to bring back the service or the facility in a safe way, as I had said before. There's also a communication plan, so those are all covered within the mayor's report on the recovery. The last piece of that report also deals, there's a Halton Recovery Committee that has been set up that meets every Tuesday morning. And you can see in that report the agenda items. There is, to a great extent, a desire to coordinate the service delivery within the Halton municipalities so that from a overall community perspective, we can be opening up facilities at a very similar time frame. So what's open and what's closed? The website that the town has keeps this information updated on an ongoing basis. You'll see that there are several programs and services that come in, and we ensure that this website is always updated with both facilities that are opening as well as services that might be provided. So, excuse me. The facilities are well understood and listed there. I do need to emphasize that in terms of service levels themselves, while our service levels are returning, we still are very much looking at COVID issues as the priority, and we're pulling in a gradual return of services. So if I can give you some examples of tree permits, for example, grass cutting, we're now moving into getting a normal state of grass cutting, but those things have taken us some time to bring up to normal service. The best example is municipal enforcement. It will be focused for quite some time on enforcement of COVID-related items, and it will slowly and gradually bring in all of the other enforcement of the town's bylaws over time. Hopefully by the fall, we'll be in a good place. So what's coming? A lot of the facilities were not opened from the town's perspective on the Friday. We needed, as I had said before, some time to ramp up to ensure we could provide those facilities safely. But this gives you an idea of what's coming. So splash pads, which would have been wonderful this weekend with a very hot weather, but we're supposed to have a very hot summer, so I'm sure they'll be enjoyed the whole year. June 26th, so this Friday, those splash pads will be open. We'll also be looking and bringing the indoor and some of the indoor, one indoor pool and 3 outdoor pools by mid-July. And that's at the same time as summer camps will be opening on July 13th. So registration for the summer camps, which I know lots of parents have been looking forward to, begins on June 27th. So that will, all those details are on our website in order to get registered for those summer camp programs. Other pieces that will be coming are transit service will return to its front door boarding. We have installed plexiglass partitions that provide the driver some safety so that now passengers can load from the front. That also means that we'll be returning to fare collection as of July 2nd. At the same time, we'll have the Service Oakville counter at the front of Town Hall open so that anyone who would want to purchase their Presto cards can come in and get their card right from Service Oakville. That will be certainly a clear signal that the town is opening up its services. We have at this point in time had limited services at the front counter, mostly, or at the Service Oakville, mostly appointment only, but it will be open as of July the 2nd. And on July the 6th, our full-time staff will return. So many of them will be coming back from redeployments, not all of them. There are some that have been, for example, redeployed into grass cutting and other types of services through the town, but most of them will be coming back to their normal work. And when I say come back, that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be coming back to their offices specifically. They may be still, to a great extent, working at home, but they will be returning to normal business that they were carrying out before. But again, I do want to put a little bit of caution on that, in that we still are very much focused on the COVID issues, and so the return to normal business will be gradual over the summer. So the last slide I have for you is what's closed. So this just reminds us we have not quite gotten into a fully open state, which is why the provincial reference is good about restarting the economy. We still are very much into that. So the playgrounds and the play structures that are in our parks are closed. The outdoor equipment, arenas, youth centers, fitness centers, senior centers, those types of facilities, as well as a few other, still remain closed, and they will remain closed until the province tells us that we can open them. So we're completely at their discretion in terms of when they can be open again. And so you have on this agenda both this verbal update. You also have the recovery framework report from Mayor Burton, as well as a report from the Economic Task Force from Mayor Burton. And the third report is there is a rent relief report for town tenants also on the agenda. We had brought forward a report for rent relief for other tenants within our buildings. This provides an opportunity to provide an equal treatment for all the town tenants. And on July the 6th, we had originally started back in April with setting out several phases of work to be done in our recovery. And we anticipated that by the beginning of July, we would be back up to full services. Well, that was a little optimistic. So we're not going to be there. As you can see, there still are a number of facilities that are closed. So we will be bringing to Council on July the 6th the report just that gives you a financial update on where we are as we've moved through this recovery timeframe. And with that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, CAO Closey. Council, who wants to go first? Councillor Chisholm?
Thank you, Worship. Just a couple of quick questions, and thank you, Jane, for the update. It's very informative. I understand the content of the playbook too. It's very systematic and well done. Question on the playbook. There was some concern of staff coming back to work. Is there an issue with staff not coming back to work because they're still threatened with the opportunity of getting COVID-19, or is that an issue?
No, we have, all of our facilities have been cleaned, so they're in good shape for staff coming back again. We are looking at how we can ensure that we've maintained the physical distance separating as to the extent possible, and where we can't. The town will be providing staff with cloth masks in case they feel that they would prefer to wear those. So that is available to them as well. So we feel that we've created through that playbook, which is quite a detailed report, looking at all the aspects that we need to put in place. We have retained an architect to look at our office space to see how that office space can be best designed in order to provide for those distance separations. So those department plans of how to bring staff back will follow that playbook. And for their independent or their particular businesses, they'll then design a plan that will provide a safe environment for staff to come back.
Okay, thank you. Do you know what the rationale from the province with respect to opening up the splash pads and the pools, but not the playground equipment? What is the rationale from that process from the province on that one?
I will actually refer to Colleen Bell, if she happens to know that answer. I do think there is some science out there that the chlorine from the pools would assist in the disease or combating it to some extent, which is not prevalent on the playground equipment. So I think that may actually be part of the reason why. Beyond that, I don't know the rationale.
Thank you, because that's debatable with the science with respect to chlorine. Chlorine's in the water, it's not in the air. But however, I gather that's probably the rationale for that.
And that is, I do need to say, a bit of a guess. Just from what we've heard before, we really don't understand the rationale between those two.
Okay. Thank you, Jane. That's fine. I think that's my only questions I have, and my congratulations to you and your staff in putting this forward. It's very comprehensive and well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Councillor Lischina.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Jane, I also appreciate the detailed report. Could you state how many spaces are for the new types of camps for the summer. And it was indicated that it's first come, first serve. Could that be an issue with the distribution for the town of the different wards?
So while Colleen is coming up here to give you a little bit more description on the summer camps, we have, as part of our looking at any of the facilities, looked at a geographic distribution so we can ensure we've covered off the town. That's been one of our criteria in opening them up. And I'll refer to Colleen for some details on summer camps.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. The summer camps are going to be operating at about between 25 and 30% of what we would normally do. We're looking at opening at all of our community centers, including 16 Mile, partially because of social distancing, and we want to make sure that we're able to maintain all of those pieces. And also from a geographic standpoint, as Jane had previously identified. We are going to be opening up registration this Thursday. It will be first come, first serve. We do have very strict guidelines around which we have to follow from the province. So for example, parents have to have taken temperature checks of their children before they arrive, and they have to go through the same screening process, which our staff do as well. There's also deep cleaning hygiene standards as well that we have to follow. We are also being very careful in terms of, normally when we run camps, there's often what I would call is cross-pollination, as in you can often put several groups of kids together for certain activities. We will not be doing that. So small group of children will stay with their own instructor, and there will be no joining of groups to ensure safety. One of the things that we are trying to sort out right now is that there is confusion in terms of provincial guidelines versus some other guidelines with respect to the staff to children ratio, and whether or not support staff are included in that ratio or not. If they're not included in the ratio, then our capacity actually increases. We have a meeting tomorrow with Hamilton, Peel, and Halton municipalities to try and figure out what our capacity levels are so they're consistent across the Western GTA. So when we know that, then if the capacity level goes up, then we'll try and revise it as much as possible. One thing that you need to be aware of as we reintroduce programs and services, we will be constantly reviewing the congregation limits and adjusting as we're able to add more participant time slots on.
Councillor Lischina is grateful for your answer. The next is Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Theo, closely for your comprehensive report. My question is in regards to playground structures. I think there might be some confusion with residents and the public on whether the structures are open or not, and I know it's listed on the town website. A lot of the fencing around the structures has been torn down. So I'm just wondering if we have an update from our park ambassadors on how they're dealing with this. Do we have park ambassadors at every park across the town that are advising residents that the structures still remain closed? Just because with all of the announcements of what's opening up, people may have misunderstood and thought that, playground structures are also opening up. So just wanted to know if we have any plans to really make sure that's being enforced.
So with respect to the playgrounds, as you know, they are still not open. And as Jane has identified, there has been no specific logic identified as to why they are not open at this time. We have been either putting up fencing, or we've also been putting up caution tape. As we found during the flooding of 2017 and 19, people often view caution tape as a guideline. And certainly children are just actively trying to go onto the playgrounds anyway, and they're completely ignoring the caution tape. We do have parks ambassadors who are going around and trying to educate parents and kids about the fact that they shouldn't be on the playground equipment. Parks also is going around and inspecting as well. on a daily basis, and they're also reinstating both the fencing and the caution tape, but I will be honest in saying it's an uphill battle.
Okay, thank you for that. And then just in terms of the staff that are returning on July 6th, will we have additional staff deployed to Parks Ambassadors? Do we increase the amount of ambassadors up on the weekends, out on the weekends as well?
So with staff returning, the Parks Ambassador group basically ends for the most part. However, municipal enforcement and Parks Patrol will remain in place, and so we will continue to enforce where appropriate. A lot of the staff that were Parks Ambassadors are recreation staff, and I'm sorry.
Commissioner, the other microphone will let everybody hear you better.
This one?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the Parks Ambassadors will be returning. A lot of them are recreation staff. The issue that we're finding is that as services are returning, the level of detail and requirements for return to service for recreation services in particular are extremely prescriptive and detailed, and it requires a lot of analysis and work that needs to be done in order to prepare. So it's not a standard return to service in the way that we would have experienced in the past. So we have to change what our training is. We have to look at our hygiene standards. We have to look at the flow of the public going in and out of our spaces. And we have to look at things like contactless payment. There's a number of things that we have to look at on an ongoing basis. So we're anticipating over time the recreation services are going to be flowing back in over the course of the summer, and we need the expertise of our recreation staff to begin to prepare for that.
Great. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask if our staff could provide an update to the community on the plans for Canada Day and July 1st and fireworks, if you will, and how we are dealing with that as a town and how we're encouraging our residents to deal with that. I know we had a long conversation about fireworks at our last meeting, and I wonder if you could update us on that. I know that we have not, for example, restricted the sale of fireworks as has been done in a few communities. I wonder if you could update us on that.
Certainly. So first of all, we would certainly encourage all of our residents to use the virtual fireworks app so that they can enjoy it safely along with all of the other residents around town. That being said, fireworks are obviously not banned, but we will be sending out a communication to remind all of our residents to use fireworks in a safe manner and follow safety rules. We would also ask that they do not send off fireworks after 11 o'clock at night because people are less appreciative after that hour, particularly if they have small children, and that they cannot set fireworks off in a public place. So we will be sending out communications on that particular point in the next few days. The Canada Day celebrations are obviously going to be a little bit different this year. There are a number of things that we're going to be doing. We're going to be recording messages from all of our elected officials wishing everyone a very happy and safe Canada Day. We have also done a lot of pre-recorded performances of some of our local artists, such as the Oakville Symphony and martial arts groups and other cultural groups that we will be able to stream on our website. From a public standpoint, we're asking everyone to decorate their houses in red and white and Canadian flags and any other decorations that they would like to put up, to sing the national anthem at the end of their driveways, to do Canada Day barbecues. We do have a virtual sing-along that people can participate in as well. Because it's the 153rd birthday, we will be distributing 150 trees that residents can pick up and plant, which will work to increase our tree canopy. And there's also commemorative rocks that people can pick up so that they can put art on them and be part of a future installation. And we're also encouraging all of our residents to send in poetry and artwork that we can display on our website.
Thank you so much for all your efforts and that of all the staff taking care of this during this difficult time.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Robertson, please unmute yourself.
Hi, my question is about libraries and in the plans of reopening in terms of facilities, what's happening with libraries. I know that I have residents that have no computer access at all right now and have always relied on the libraries, and I wanted to be able to tell them what's happening.
So first of all, with the libraries, as you know, 2 weeks ago they introduced curbside pickup and drop-off. Of the drop-off, as you know, there's about 60,000 pieces of product that were out in the community prior to COVID. We've got about 8% back in. So it's a slow, steady stream, and that's actually great because it's easier for the staff to manage because we have to quarantine it for 72 hours. The curbside pickup is proving to be a huge success as more and more people find out about it. As you know, you have to book online in order to arrange for curbside pickup. And within 2 weeks, we're now at 95% capacity. So clearly, this is an area of interest, and it's a great service for the public. So the library is currently looking at how they might be able to expand that service to all of the branches within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Because clearly, we're going to end up with waiting lists really quickly. So we're going to try and sort that out as fast as we can. With respect to the access to computers, this is a much more sensitive issue. We will have a lot of regulation attached to it because it's an inside service. So Tara and the team are looking at starting off with perhaps 1 or 2 locations and figuring out how best to manage that. So that's something that they're working on right now and are in intensive discussions with the other Halton area libraries. So stay tuned.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Sanju is next. Thank you, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Thank you, CEO Closey and Commissioner Bell, for your information. This is very, very helpful. I just have 2 kind of little tag-on questions. CEO Closey, I think I heard you say that Camp Oak registration was going to open up on the 27th. Is it the 25th or the 27th in the morning at 9 o'clock?
No, it's the 25th on Thursday.
Okay, perfect. And just a question kind of tagging on to Councillor Chisholm's question about the province's indication about opening up splash pads versus playgrounds. Do we have any kind of guarantee either from our regional health department about transmission via water in the splash pads? Because I believe that's just regular, it's not chlorinated water from the same perspective that we would get in our pools. So I'm just trying to understand that a little bit better. If we don't know the answers to that right now, that's okay. If we need to go back to region, that's fine too, but I'm trying to understand.
So we worked very closely with Regional Public Health. They attended several meetings with all the recreation departments throughout the region to get advice on how best to open up both pools as well as the splash pads. So really the guidelines and the way we're approaching the opening up of the splash pads and pools is in accordance with the information and the guidance that Halton Public Health has provided to us.
Okay.
We're very comfortable with the approach that they've provided us. And that coordination has been essential in smoothing the way and enabling us to open up the splash pads and pools as soon as we could.
Okay, that's helpful. Do we have any additional, or are we going to leave any signage up at the parks indicating that splash pads are used at their own risk?
Absolutely. Signage is our key in terms of informing the public what they need to do to protect themselves through the virus. I think generally we're moving into a place where it is to a great extent the individuals that need to ensure that they've protected their health. So as much education and information, signage through our website, through all the communications, social media that the town does, will be conveying the messages in terms of how they can do that best at any of the facilities that we have.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haslett-Thiel, are you next?
My question is more informational. I'm wondering if we're aware of other organizations that are going to step up to fill the need for summer camps, and if they've reached out in terms of safety protocols to the town. The 25 to 30%, I think you guys are doing amazing to jump through all the details and try and offer this. And I'm just wondering if others have come to you and said, we can assist, we're going to run certain camps. There are a lot of parents obviously concerned they don't have access to camps this summer.
So we have had ongoing discussions with others who provide summer camps. There hasn't been a lot of take-up from others. I think very similar to the daycare issue, you're actually left with providing for half the number of participants with the same amount of energy and staff and resources. So we haven't seen a lot of take-up from other agencies, other places for the summer programs. We are aware of several that have canceled them through the summer.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. CAO Fosi, you mentioned splash pads were opening June 26th. That's all splash pads in town?
Yep, there's 17 splash pads. I think I had said 16 in the update. There's actually 17. And I understand there may be a new one that maybe we would be getting from the developer in the North Oakville area as well. So there could be as many as 18 of them opening on Friday.
Excellent.
We actually didn't want to open them in a partial way because you could contribute to congregating around them. So it was better for us to get all of them up and running at the same time.
Good point. In terms of the pools that will be opening, you mentioned 3 pools that will be opening. Do we have the names of those yet?
Yeah, the Lions Park would be opening. Fulgerwood and Wedgwood were the 3 outdoor pools that we were opening. QEP was the 1 indoor pool. QEP has the both a swim group is registered to be in there, so it's open for that purpose. And also QEP has the best mechanisms to be able for us to implement the protocols. So the distance separation between things, the way you can ingress and egress from the pool area are all key pieces that help us better implement the protocols. So those are the 4 in total pools that would be open and accessible July 13th.
All right, thank you for that. And I appreciate the updates on the town website. That's been very helpful for our residents and for ourselves. I had a question regarding parking lots. Gerlach has been reopened. The temporary parking on Maple Grove by the Edgemere Trail has been removed, so parking is allowed there. We still have some neighborhood parks, if I could call them that, like Deer Run, where the parking lots remain closed. Are we on the way to opening those, or I'm just wondering the rationale behind keeping those closed?
We are, as I understand, on our way to opening those. The only parking lots that we have kept closed under the provincial order are those associated with the recreation facilities because that fits with the provincial order. So all of the others that are capable of being opened, and I say that only because if there's some construction or renovation to that lot, it may be closed for other purposes, but we'll be moving to open all of them.
All right, so for example, Deer Run, there are tennis courts there, so that could be construed as a recreational facility?
No, I don't believe it can. What I will commit to do is in the update that we have tonight, I'll list out any of the parking lots that are closed. The recreation facilities would be the main recreation facilities that you have throughout town. Those and their associated parking lots would be what's closed by provincial order. The tennis courts are open now, and so they wouldn't be part of that. So I will get you a listing of what parking lots are closed, what parking lots are not closed for other reasons. And if they are closed and about to open, I'll let you know that as well. So you'll get a good outline on parking lots.
much appreciated. And washrooms, public washrooms are being opened.
Yes.
Are I take it the ones that are more accessible for cleaning and the higher use washrooms are being opened sooner or have already been opened. What about the remaining public washrooms?
As I understand, all the public washrooms are open. I did hear that the one downtown in Town Square was closed over the weekend. I understand they're on a timer, so it might have been the timer or the time of day, but they are open as well. There were some washrooms that were under construction, so they would be opening. They are all open now, as I understand it.
Would you be good enough to include that with the parking lots in the update?
Sure.
Great. Thank you very much. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Well, thank you, Councillor. Maybe I'm out of hands. All right. Is there a mover and seconder to receive the three reports? Councillor Robertson and Councillor Chisholm, thank you. Councillor Haslett-Thiel?
Mayor Burton, I have some questions related to the communication strategy that I believe are best asked in camera. Can we not move that component until we can go in camera?
Councillor, I'm talking about the COVID-19 update, the recovery framework update, and the economic task force update.
Right, but in the recovery update, in the recovery program strategy and framework, there is information related to personnel and legal matters that maybe I'm ahead of myself, that should be discussed in camera.
Thank you for that. Councillor Adams?
Thank you. It wasn't quite clear to me. Are you intending for us to move items 2, 3, and 4 altogether?
I asked for a motion for 2, 3, and 4. We've been taking questions on 2, 3, and 4. If there are additional questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Then I have a quick question for you. Councillor Lischina and I met with Sheridan College last week, and we suggested to them that connecting with you on the economic task force would be a useful initiative. And I just wanted to make sure that the wagons had all been circled and everyone had figured out where everyone was on the matter. Has Sheridan College been able to connect with you on that issue?
I don't know because their connection would be through Dorothy, but I'll find out for you and let you know.
Thank you very much.
Madam CAO, is there a confidential matter in the recovery framework update report?
No, I'm not aware of one. There is a communication plan that's attached to that report, but it would have no confidential items within it, to my knowledge.
Councillor Haslett-Thiel, are you comfortable to ask your question in public?
Well, the communication plan highlights a SWOT analysis that was done and relates to the town employees and their return to work. It references some information that I think is more appropriate to ask in camera related to labor relations.
I'll second the motion to go into camera at the appropriate time for Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Well, she doesn't need a motion to do that. Thank you, Councillor. We just have to determine what the legitimate grounds for going into camera might be. And we will do that. And so we'll move item 3 down to the end of the meeting for the reasons I explained earlier, that to go into camera, we have to do it at the end so as not to interrupt the YouTube stream. Is there a mover and seconder for to receive item 2? That would be Councillor Sanju and Councillor Adams. Is there any objection to receiving item 2? Madam Clerk, there is no objection. Item 2 is received. Is there a mover and seconder to receive item 4, the Economic Task Force update? Councillor Knoll and Councillor Chisholm, thank you. Is there an objection to receiving the Economic Task Force update report? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The matter is received. So the question of receiving the information on item number 3, Councillor Haslett-Thiel, since the matter is to receive the report as presented, and we can, when we find a grounds to go into camera, add it to the going into camera we can go into camera on it and answer your question, but there's no action required on this. Are you content to let us receive it now and then ask the questions later? In camera?
If I understand you correctly, we'll have an opportunity to ask the questions on the communication strategy as it relates to people in camera if we receive it.
Certainly.
Okay, that's fine.
Can I take you for moving receipt?
Sure.
Thank you. Can I get a seconder? Councillor Lischina, is there any objection to receipt? Madam Clerk, there's no objection and the matter is received. Council, we now turn to the 2019 financial statements report. And I can only wish that the 2020 financial statements report next year will be as strong and glowing as this report. We have a presentation by John Vanderheiden, our Deputy Treasurer and Manager of Accounting. And if we give our attention to him, he can summarize what you've read and share some of this with the public. Mr. Vanderheiden, you are on.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm here before you this afternoon to address 2 different items on the agenda, actually. The first is for the approval of both the town's 2019 consolidated financial statements and the town's 2019 trust financial statements. And the second item is actually number 9 on your agenda for the receipt of the audit findings report from the town's external auditor from KPMG. And maybe I'll pause there for a second to make sure I'm okay to continue with both items, even though they're a little out of order. Is that acceptable? Yes, all right. We are joined by Zoom by 2 of the audit team members from KPMG, and I'll introduce them in a couple of minutes. But before I do this, there's a few things that I would like to highlight for council on the town's 2019 financial statements. So this is the first time that we are presenting the financial statements directly to council. Previously, we've gone to committee. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to provide a brief overview of the financial statements and the process that we follow in preparing them. The town is required to prepare annual financial statements, which must then be audited and then must be approved by council. And these financial statements are consolidated, which means that they contain the results not only for the town itself, but also for the Oakville Public Library and the local business improvement areas, the 3 BIAs. Those entities also produce their own financial statements, which are also audited individually, and those are approved by their various boards in due time. In order to prepare the annual statements, the finance department here at the town undertakes a year-end process to ensure that all of the financial activity for the year has been appropriately recorded and captured. And as part of that process, we must ensure that all this activity is done in accordance with something called the Public Sector Accounting Standards. And these are the accounting standards that the town and all other government entities must follow in reporting financial results. And it's important to note that these standards are different than the budget that you approve every year. So there are some differences between what you see in the regular reports, the variance reports, and what you see in the package in front of you. And I will touch on a couple of those differences as we go through. As part of that, we also include Appendix C in our package, which is actually a bit of a reconciliation between what you saw previously from our finance team on the operating results and how that reconciles with the numbers that you see, or at least the final number that you see as our final surplus in our audited package. And don't worry, I won't go through every line in there, but if you'd like to, I'd be happy to chat about that anytime. Just let me know. Before I actually dive into a few key components of the financial statements themselves, I wanted to know if there are any questions on that part of the process to start with.
Council, are there any questions so far? Mr. Vanderheiden, I believe that you're free to go ahead.
All right. So starting with the town's consolidated financial statements, this is Appendix A of the staff report. The first item that I would like to draw your attention to is actually on page 1. And this statement indicates that the financial statements are indeed the responsibility of management and not the auditor. There is often a confusion. They think that they are the auditor's financial statements, but they do indeed belong to the town. The second item is the auditor's report, which is the next page, or it starts on the next page, page 2. And I don't want to steal too much thunder from KPMG, but I do want to highlight for council that the audit opinion from KPMG, the very first paragraph you see there, is a unqualified or clean audit opinion. That's a good thing, and we're quite happy with that. And I'm pretty sure KPMG will touch on that more. Moving to the balance sheet, or what's also known as the statement of financial position, which is on page 5, there's a couple things that I would like to note for you. The first section of this page is our financial assets, and the town's financial assets have grown from last year. And this can actually most obviously be seen in our increase in our cash balance. Generally, we would prefer to invest our excess funds, those we don't need for our short-term obligations. However, at year-end, town finance staff decided to keep funds in our bank account, as the interest rates that we were offered by our financial institution were actually more favorable than short-term investing opportunities at that time. So that is not normally the amount of cash that we just carry around. It just happens to be that case at year-end. Overall, our financial assets have grown by over $45 million from last year. And on the liability side, as we move down that page, the liabilities have also increased by approximately $36 million. And the biggest driver of that increase in our liabilities is the increase in what's called our obligatory reserve funds. And these reserve funds are funds that we receive from developers through development charges, and also for gas tax funds. And the balances will fluctuate depending on when we receive the funds and the projects that we actually use the funds for. In 2019, we received more funds than were used by capital projects, and a fluctuation is not abnormal here, so you will see that balance go up and down through the course of the years. Altogether, our net financial asset position has almost $325 million, which is a good thing. It means that we have sufficient resources to fund our obligations. And then if you look at the very bottom of our balance sheet, you will see a very big number. It's called our tangible capital assets. That number is $1.7 billion. Think of that as all of our facilities, our roads, our sewers, our equipment, all those sorts of things. And the very last number on that first page on the balance sheet is our accumulated surplus, which is now over $2 billion. And keep in mind, and I say this every year, that does not mean we have $2 billion sitting in the bank account. There's a further detail in the financial statements that breaks down where that number comes from, and I'll get to that in a minute. On the income statement, so this is the next page, it's also known as the statement of operations. This is page 6. You will see that there are 3 columns presented here. One is for the budget that you approved for 2019, one is for the 2019 actual results, and one is for the results from last year, 2018. The results for the year are broken down by the type of revenue in the revenue section and the nature of the expenses in the expense section. And again, I won't go through every line, but just want to highlight a couple of items for you. On the revenue side, taxation revenue, which is the first line, has increased by $8 million and exceeded budget by $3 million, and that's primarily due to supplementary tax bills, but it also includes the new municipal accommodation tax that we started last year. If you look further down the revenue section, you will see a line called developer contributions and charges that came in at $78 million, which is an increase of $20 million from last year and more than, it's almost $50 million more than budget. That's due to developers donating capital assets to the town. They're recorded as revenue in that manner. And that number, again, just like we talked about for the development, for the obligatories, that number does change every year based on what the developers give us. And just by way of comparison, we received $45 million in donated tangible capital assets from developers in 19 and only $11 million in 2018. So that's why the numbers do look different year over year. As we move down our income statement, you can look now at the expenses. And just a brief reminder, and this is one of the differences between the budgeted statements that we see, or the budgeted information that you approve, and these audited statements. Amortization is included in these audited statements. This is the amortization of our tangible capital assets. And therefore, comparing to budget by function as is listed is not always ideal. Amortization expense was over $40 million for the town last year, so that can easily skew some of the categories presented. It's usually easier to compare to prior year. And in taking a look at the different categories there, you'll notice that 2 of them have changed by about $6 million each. Both general government and transportation both decreased by about $6 million. And most of that in both cases is due to decreased capital project work that was expensed in the prior year. So it's more the absence of something in this past year, and a lot of that has to do with timing as well. Overall, our net surplus finished the year at just over $87 million. Now we move to the notes to the financial statements. One little editing comment here. The notes start on page 8. There's actually 2 page 8s in the package you have due to the formatting of them. That will be fixed on the final draft in case anyone else had noticed that. But starting on the second page 8, the notes provide additional information to the reader of the financial statement about the town's financial results. And again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but highlighting a couple of key ones. So the first 2 are actually note 4 and 5, and note 4 starts on page 14. And these 2 notes, notes 4 and 5, contain information about the town's 2 government business enterprises, that's an accounting term, to describe both Oakville Municipal Development Corporation, MDC, and Oakville Enterprises, more commonly known as Oakville Hydro, and it includes a summary of their financial information for the year. Note 6, which is on page 19, refers to the obligatory reserve funds that I was talking about earlier. And there's a schedule here that actually shows which funds we received and which funds we've used. Note 8, which is on page 21, contains the details for the town's long-term debt. We did not issue any debt in 2019, and we continue to make our regular principal payments as we should. Note 10, which is on the bottom of page 22, includes information about our 2 employment benefit obligations. One of these is for our post-employment benefits. So think of this as our health and dental after people retire. And the other one is for WSIB. If we turn to page 28, this is note 12, which is called accumulated surplus. And earlier I had referenced that $2 billion in accumulated surplus that we have. And this note describes the various components of the surplus. And again, as you can see, most of this was related to the $1.7 billion in the net book value of our tangible capital assets, and also includes our investment in Oakville Hydro, unspent capital funds, and the various reserves and reserve funds that I know you're familiar with. Note 17, which begins on page 33 and provides a description of each of our service areas, also includes a breakdown of each service area by their revenue and expense type. So it's a little bit more detail than what's included already in the income statement or the statement of operations. And finally, note 19 is a new note this year and was added in consultation with our auditors from KPMG. And it's to address the current COVID-19 pandemic, highlighting that there are a lot of potential changes to financial information depending on what happens in the world. And I'm sure you can join me in hoping that we don't need that note next year. So those are all of the items that I wanted to highlight for you on the town's financial statements. And before I go into the trust financial statements, is there anything specific on the town statements that you'd like to ask me about?
Councillor Elgar.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mayor Burton, I'm just wondering if going forward, we can put in the portion of how much Oakville is subsidizing growth every year. And I note the last time I've seen it was 2017, and that was in the order of $16,210,000 where the taxpayers are subsidizing the growth. And I just wondered, do you have a new figure or one that we could get that's up to date?
I do not have that figure. I'm going to let Nancy speak to that.
Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Burton, we don't have an up-to-date figure. We would do that when we update our development charge study. And I would recommend that the more appropriate place to do that would be as we bring forward our background study and possibly through the annual budget process as opposed to with the financial statements.
So at this point, it is probably true that we're still subsidizing at the rate of about $16 million a year.
That's
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I thank you. Thanks very much.
Mr. Vander Heiden, I think you're clear to go.
All right. So the second set of financial statements that you have in front of you is for the town's trust financial statements. Oh, is there a question?
Mayor Burton, can I ask this question?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. I just wanted to understand on page 28, under reserves, reserve funds set aside for specific purposes. The street trees is dramatically different in 2019 versus 2018. Is there a reason why?
Certainly, anytime that we use funds out of a reserve fund, we pull them into our operations to use them for a specific purpose. Off the top of my head, I do not know what that specific purpose was this year, but I can certainly look into that and let you know. And I see Nancy's coming up, so she might know. I'll pass it to her.
Sorry, through you, Mayor Burton, that is an old reserve fund that we have been using up as we plant trees. The developers now, it's part of their responsibility in the subdivision, so we don't collect that money anymore. So you'll see it going down until it gets used up.
Okay, thanks very much.
All righty then. John? Oh, Councillor Lischina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Jonathan, can you just clarify? So in the report, it was noted that the audit was substantially completed before we did the shutdown by March, mid-March or whatever. So is there any, I mean, most of it seems to be online work through the digital process. Is there anything that was not being able to be done that had to be done in person and is just finishing up?
KPMG can address the very specifics of their audit process. There are some things they need to do today, which includes getting council approval on the financial statements. But our processes are pretty digital already, so a lot of the information that we need to provide to KPMG, we can actually do through our systems. We've invested in that in the last number of years, and it proved very helpful this year.
Thank you, Councillor Lischina. Anyone else? All right, let's have John continue.
All right, so the next set of statements are a much smaller set of financial statements, and these are the trust financial statements, and I won't say too much about them, but these reflect the financial activity for the various trust funds that the town maintains. And as you can see in the statement of operations within those financial statements, the town holds funds in trust for the various cemeteries around town, for Halton Information Providers, which is a library initiative, as well as for a number of various boating and sports clubs. And these last two groups have funds in trust with the town to ensure that there are adequate funds available for the eventual demolition of their facilities that are built on town land. There's not a lot of activity in our trust funds, but we are required to have council approve them every year. And so I want to make sure that you're aware of them and take any questions on those that you might have as well. All right, if there are none, then I'm going to pass things along to KPMG to present on their audit findings report, which is item number 9 on your agenda. Joining us today are Lois Willette, she's the audit partner, and Matt Chiardelli, who's the audit manager.
Thank you, John. Just before we hear from Lois, I'm looking for a mover and seconder to approve the 2019 Town of Oakville Consolidated Financial Statements and the Town of Oakville Trust Fund financial statements. Councillor Giddings and Councillor Adams, any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and those statements are approved. Thank you, John. Now we bring Lois and Matthew in virtually, I guess. Lois, I guess you're going first.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Good. Okay, I was a little panicked there because my screen went totally blank just as you were saying I was going to be joining you. So, but I came back. So thank you so much for having us join the meeting today, and via Zoom. It is becoming less and less a novelty for us. We're doing a number of council meetings, board meetings, audit committee meetings by this method. So we're getting used to it, and hopefully we'll be able to make the presentation and not put you to sleep. So I understand our audit findings report is in your package. Unfortunately, I don't have your page numbers. I only have my page numbers. So I'm going to start with the executive summary, which basically outlines some highlights of the audit, and then Matt will go into some of the more detailed specifics. One of the first things I wanted to report back to you on was we had presented to you an audit plan. Oh, I think it's going up on the screen, yes. So I'm on the first page of the executive summary. So we had presented to you our audit plan, and in that audit plan, we set out how we were going to conduct the audit, what procedures we're going to perform. Audit standards require us to report back to you when we have to audit plan. So this year, of course, with COVID-19, it did necessitate some changes to our audit plan, most notably a limitation on access and some additional procedures to validate balances that would be impacted potentially by the shutdown of the economy. And so we were able to do that. We did actually do the majority of this audit remotely. We were fortunate that our audit senior lives across the street from Town Hall, so when needed, he just zipped across. John was available to accommodate him, and he came in and looked at what he needed when he needed it. But the majority of the audit was actually done remotely. And fortunately, we had already moved to a remote work environment at KPMG. So we had the equipment, the technology, and the resources to conduct an audit in that manner. We just had to rejig how we obtained audit evidence a little bit. But so for the most part, that went smoothly, but it was a change obviously in our audit planning. As John mentioned, there are a few procedures remaining, but nothing that has arisen as a result of COVID-19. The remaining procedures are the ones that are typically outstanding at this point in an audit process. And that's because auditing standards regards our meeting with you as part of an audit. So even though we've done on all our audit procedures, meeting with you and discussing our findings is part of auditing standards and is something we have to do before we can issue our audit report. So that's one of the things that is still outstanding. Your approval of the financial statements as a council is also something we wait for. Our audit report will be dated the date that you approve the financial statements. And then the last thing that is outstanding is a representation letter that we provide to management, but it's actually management writing to us representing certain things about the audit. And that letter must be dated the date that you approve the financial statements. So those procedures remain, and they have to remain outstanding until after this meeting. Annually, I talk to you about independence, and I'm happy to report we've evaluated our independence with the town of Oakville and all of the Oakville audits, and we have concluded that we are independent of the organization, which that is the crux of an audit, that the auditors be independent. I'm going to let Matt talk to you about the remaining things on this executive summary. If we could move to, yes, I think if we can move to page 2 of our report, and Matt will take over from here.
Welcome, Matt. It's a handsome picture in your report.
Thank you, and hopefully everybody can hear me. Just want to let you know that if there are any questions about the audit approach or anything in our report as I go through, feel free to stop me.
Actually,
so I will start
Matt,
on page 1.
Because of our virtual meeting and who can see what, it's actually more convenient for people to hold their questions to the end, and everybody on council is good at that. So if you could go through, and the reason I said it is because we have a presentation on the screen which makes it hard to see people and recognize them and share the meeting. So hope you understand, and away you go.
Okay, no problem. That's perfectly fine as well. So starting on the page that is on the screen now, this is a significant risk that anybody who has seen an audit findings report from KPMG in the past will be familiar with. This is a presumed fraud risk, and that is that of management override of controls. This is something that must be addressed in every audit performed under our professional standards. And essentially, it demands that our audit procedures and approach include procedures to address this risk specifically. So we do design our audits with elements of unpredictability and perform procedures that hone in on specific risk areas we feel are relevant and unique to yourselves. And based on the results of our testing there, we have no significant findings to report, no instances of management override of controls to bring to your attention. Certainly good news. If I can ask that the page be turned. Thank you. So the second and probably one of the larger areas of focus for this year's audit specifically is the post-employment benefit liabilities. And John alluded to this in his walkthrough of the financial statement. This is an estimate for future liabilities, and standard process for these is that an external valuation performed by a third-party actuary be conducted in full every 3 years. So as of the year end December 2019, that was a requirement. That valuation will support the numbers in this year's financial statements and will be refreshed by the third-party actuary for each of the next 2 years, and then the cycle will start again. So because that was carried out this year, KPMG's audit incorporates procedures over the data that is sent to that third-party actuary, allowing them to estimate the future liability. So what we do is essentially audit on a substantive basis samples from the employee census data that is sent to that actuary, and we make sure that the data checks out against the supporting documents from employment contracts, HR records, and such. And happy to report that our scope was not limited whatsoever in this area, despite the fact that it was performed largely on a remote basis. So we do want to thank management and their staff for their cooperation and their patience as we navigated that challenge right at the beginning of the COVID-19 shutdown. We were able to get all of the information we needed in a secure way to satisfy the audit procedures. So worth noting here that there was nothing that came to our attention as a result of that led to changes in the report that the third party presented, and the financial statements were adjusted to match the valuation that was given to management in that way. Turning the page once more. Another area that had a little bit of a unique finding this year, there was a change in estimate related to capital assets. And this is something that management brought to our attention before the start of the audit process, so during the fiscal year. They determined that it made sense to split road surfaces from the road base when amortizing those assets over their useful life. And this is really a discretionary choice, and it is very much in line with peers in the industry. So we went through a series of conversations with management at the time and made sure that we were in agreement with their change in methodology for this. And essentially what this means is road surfaces and road bases will now be amortized at different lengths of time, one lasting significantly longer than the other, whereas previous to this year, they were both amortized over a midpoint in between those two useful lives. So we believe that management's rationale for making this change is sufficient and better represents the true useful life of the base of the road compared to the surface. Turning the page once more. Thank you. A little bit less unique, certainly investments in the portfolio are something that we focus on each and every year during our audits because of their magnitude. Very straightforward for us as auditors to get third-party confirmation of valuations as at financial statement date. which was the case this year. Worth noting that obviously because of the pandemic happening subsequent to year end, that portfolio investments, of course, took a downturn around March, which they are still in the process of recovering from. So we did go a little bit further and assess for the potential for long-term impairment. But based on the nature of those investments, we do think that it is a fluctuation based on a point in time, and there is no adjustment to the portfolio as a result of the pandemic. Turning the page once again. Thank you. Accounts payable, accrued liabilities, operating expenses, always an area of focus in our audits, particularly with regards to significant estimates, which are usually related to payroll, accruals for vacation, and that last pay period, which hangs over year end. And then we also look specifically at cutoff for expenses that may be incurred but not necessarily invoiced as at the financial statement date. And happy to report that there were no material differences to bring to your attention with regards to any of those areas. Next, the contaminated sites liability. Oops, sorry, I think we're one page too far. There we go. Again, something we look at every year as part of our audits, not a significant amount of movement this year. So I will just note that management's process for identifying those potential liabilities and estimating their value remains sound, in our opinion, based on the work that we perform over their process. Now turning to area focus number 7, of course, the pandemic and potential impacts. So John did allude to the fact that there is a new note to the financial statements this year at the very end, a subsequent event note, which simply makes reference to the fact that the pandemic occurred subsequent to December 2019, and that there is obviously some uncertainty. There were some measures taken, including shutdown of facilities in response. This is something that KPMG and certainly many other auditors will have in their financial statements, both for December year ends and those slightly after, and really just brings to the attention that there is uncertainty, of course. There is not a lot of specific disclosure in this note beyond the reference to future uncertainty. So we can turn the page once more. That brings to the end our areas of audit focus and the meat and potatoes of the audit, so to speak. This page here, technology, I'd just like to point out the term KPMG Clara. That really just refers to some of our virtual platforms for secure file sharing and some other audit techniques that I won't go into detail with. But as both John and Lois alluded to, certainly both KPMG and yourselves have been investing in technology like this over the past few years, and it certainly paid dividends given the remote nature of the audit the pandemic demanded this year. Turning over one more. So I will pass it back to Lois here, and she'll mention briefly the future changes coming to the public sector accounting standards that will be relevant for the future.
Thank you, Matt.
Yes, so,
Are there
sorry, maybe we'll pause here if there's any questions and then I'll carry on.
Lois, are there more pages?
Or would you
Lois, I just need to know if you have more pages.
A few more pages.
Well, let's just finish those and then we'll
Okay.
take questions for both of you.
Okay, so as far as accounting policies, the accounting policies that were used to prepare the financial statements are consistent with those used in the prior year. Management did not implement any new accounting standards. You will see that the restructuring transaction standard was new this year. However, since you did not have any restructuring transactions, it was not applicable. And so there was no impact on the financial statements for that standard. I think the corrected audit differences we've spoken to in our report, and it related to the liability, the post-employment benefit liability for WSIB. It was simply a matter of the incorrect number was picked up off of the actuary's report, and we caught it on audit. And so management very willingly and quickly made that change to the financial statements. We've provided you with a number of COVID-19 resources that we have developed to assist our clients, and the links to those reports are in our in the document that we circulated. If you click on the link, it should work. You don't need the hard copy. We've also provided some thought leadership that KPMG prepares. That's for your reading information. So other than that, the appendices to our report is telling you a little bit more about KPMG and how we conduct an audit. So we're happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Lois and Matt. And look at that, the clerks have returned us to the screen. By a raise of hands, are there any? Councillor Lischina, please ask your question, unmute yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure if this is a question that potentially is for the town or the external auditor or both. So this is the year that an actuarial report was provided that the external auditors depended on. Was there anything that you had questioned in the actuarial report, either from the auditor standpoint or from the town, that had to be clarified or corrected in order for you to look at the numbers that you found for instance, for the WSIB or the employee issue?
So whenever a client uses an actuary or any other expert, auditing standards do require us to do some work over that and question things. So one of the big things we do is to look at what the town supplied to the actuary and was that accurate. So we test the information provided to the actuary, because as the common saying is, garbage in, garbage out, right? So we do test what's given to them. We sample test that. We also know that the actuary uses data and analytics techniques to determine accuracy of the data that they receive. Another big step that we look at is the assumption, determining that valuation, because it is an estimate and there are assumptions and assumptions developing the estimate. The actuary, along with management, determine what those assumptions are. We come along and we question the assumptions. We look at it compared to data that we have for our market results that we compile just for this purpose. And we test the assumptions for their validity.
So you were satisfied with each of those when you were questioning the auditor or the
yes.
Actuary? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lischina. Other questions? Well, thank you very much, Lois and Matt. Can I have a mover and seconder to receive the audit findings report? Councillor Lischina moves it. Councillor Knoll seconds it. Is there any objection to the receipt of the information? Madam Clerk, there's no objection and receipt has been achieved. Thank you very much, everybody. We now are going to turn our attention to item number 6, coyotes in residential neighborhoods. We have a presentation by Margaret Boswell, the Supervisor of Enforcement Services, and you, I believe, have had material circulated to you in advance.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I'm here to speak to you today at today's council meeting to provide information on coyotes in residential neighborhoods. As part of the presentation, information will be provided on the science of coyotes and foxes, what the community can do to maintain a balance between people, pets, and coyotes, and information on the new coyote education and response procedure and the town program. Coyotes and foxes can be found in urban centers throughout North America. Oakville is not an exception. Coyotes and foxes are part of the diverse wildlife and ecosystem found within our town. In order to maintain a balance between people and coyotes, many communities across North America have implemented coyote management plans. The town of Oakville has had a coyote management strategy in place since 2012, when the Oakville Wildlife Strategy, or OWLS, as commonly referred to, was approved by council. And the town consulted extensively with the Ministry of Natural Resources, other municipalities in Canada, and in the United States, academics, wildlife rehabilitation centers, and hunters and trappers to develop this strategy. This strategy has been updated several times since it was put in place. In 2019, Municipal Enforcement Services took on the responsibility of managing the town's coyote management program. This change came about as bylaw enforcement plays an important part in managing attractants such as feeding, garbage, and poor property maintenance that attracts small rodents that coyotes feed on, and also offers hidden areas that create ideal locations for dens. Enforcement staff can rely on regulations set out in the parks, property standards, and lot maintenance bylaws to remove these attractants, which may cause coyotes to enter into an interaction with people or pets. As a result of this transition and questions raised by concerned residents, the town undertook a review of its current program and identified opportunities for improvement in how the program could be organized and communicated. In particular, residents asked for greater clarity on how the town would respond to various types of interactions with coyotes. The result of this work is highlighted in a proposed new coyote education and response procedure and attached coyote response strategy, as attached in the appendix. The introduction of this procedure will assist in clarifying the town's objectives and what actions will be taken based on various scenarios, ranging from a sighting of a coyote at one end of the spectrum to a coyote nipping or coming in close proximity to a human or a pet at the other end of the spectrum. It is important to acknowledge that people are concerned about the presence of coyotes in the community. While coyotes are known to injure or even on occasion kill a pet, this is a risk that can be minimized. For people, the risk of a bite or a scratch is incredibly low. The town's goal in implementing these changes to its coyote management program is to provide information to help address concerns, prevent problems from occurring, and to help develop a better understanding of coyote behavior so all residents feel safe and confident walking through their neighborhood. And this will also help keep pets safe on private property as well as in local parks. The focus of the report before council is on coyotes and the town's coyote management program. Foxes are also included, however, are much smaller in scale and also smaller in size, to be honest, and tend to be viewed more as a nuisance rather than a threat. The town generally receives much fewer reports of sightings or complaints regarding foxes, although sometimes the two animals can be mistaken for each other. Given these similarities between the two species, the same protocols that are set in place for coyotes would also be applicable to foxes. Eastern coyotes are a hybrid of a smaller western coyote and eastern wolf. They are highly adaptable species that live in both urban and rural areas throughout North America, including Oakville. Eastern coyotes are a natural part of a healthy ecosystem and provide important benefits to urban communities by keeping small mammal, rodent, and goose populations under control. Coyotes also help to control disease in wildlife population by preying upon diseased wildlife and roadkill. The urbanizations of green spaces have fragmented natural habitats, and coyotes have learned to adapt to living and hunting in populated urban areas. Most coyotes live in family groups with one breeding pair and 1 to 4 other relatives. Coyotes do not hunt in packs, but work together to defend their territory from other coyote family groups. Transient coyotes live alone or as an isolated mated pair. Similar to coyotes, foxes can live in urban areas and are naturally curious, but less likely than coyotes to be concerned with the proximity that they come into with people. Foxes pose very little risk to humans, but can be carriers of the rabies virus. They are smaller than the coyotes, but similar to coyotes as they are opportunistic as they prey on smaller animals such as mice or rabbits. Given their smaller size, interaction with pets are less frequent than with coyotes. While coyotes may raise concerns about safety and risk factors, the threat to humans is not extensive. Statistics collected by Halton Public Health demonstrate that coyotes present a significantly lower risk than domestic pets in terms of altercations or contact with other pets or humans. Halton Public Health have 2 reports of bites from coyotes region-wide in 2019. These reports were filed in Burlington and Halton Hills. Neither occurred in Oakville, with one of the reports later found to have originated from outside the Halton region. Just to put this into context, this number is minimal when compared to a total of 248 reported dog bites in Oakville alone and 711 reports region-wide in the same year for dog bites. Leaving food sources that can be easily found by coyotes will lessen their natural instincts to stay away from people. It is important that the community work together to remove unsecured garbage or compost bins that can attract rodents and other pests that are food sources for coyotes and foxes. Fallen fruit and bird seed can also attract rodents and other small animals, which will also pique the attention of coyotes and lead them to cross the boundary into a backyard outside of their common green space. Leaving food out can increase the proximity tolerance of coyotes and foxes to people, pets, and other public locations. There are bylaws within the town of Oakville that prohibit the activities leading to the habituating of coyotes. These bylaws have been put in place to support the safety and preservation of the people and their pets in the community and serve to further control in providing coexistence between wildlife and residents in our urban setting. Some key bylaws that can be used to promote the maintenance of parks and private property are the parks, property standards, and lot maintenance bylaws. The lot maintenance and property standards bylaw prohibits attracting pets to property, and this provision can be used to prevent feeding on private property. Staff will also be reviewing this bylaw within the next year to ensure clear restrictions are outlined in the bylaw relating to feeding and/or food sources. The town's animal control bylaw has been put in place to promote responsible pet ownership. Under the bylaw, cats and dogs are not allowed to roam and must be leashed when off the owner's property, with the exception, of course, of off-leash dog parks. These regulations help to ensure that cats, dogs, and their owners and neighbors, and all public in general, are protected. These provisions further assist pet owners by ensuring they have control of their pet in the event of a wildlife sighting or other distraction that may arise during a walk, where you may need to pull your pet back quickly in order to promote a safe environment. The town regularly updates its coyote program to reflect best practices. In 2019, management of the town's coyote coexistence program shifted to the Municipal Enforcement Department, which allowed for further resources in the field to assist with education and outreach, investigations based on reports of den sites or coyotes coming within 2 meters of a person or pet, and also for the obvious of enforcement of various bylaws throughout the town with respect to feeding, attractants, that type of idea. We are also able to leverage, as mentioned, tools such as municipal bylaws, the coyote reporting form, various investigations led by municipal enforcement officers. We also have the opportunity to leverage knowledge from our external partners such as Coyote Watch, Oakville Green, and the Ministry of Natural Resources. We also look to partner departments for assistance with installation of signage, perhaps on trailheads or parks, to alert parks patrons of coyotes in the neighborhood. Also, officers will distribute flyers, and we also partner with communications actively to update social media and web content frequently. The role of maintaining coexistence of people, pets, and wildlife become a group effort. Every partner involved in this group plays an important role in working towards this balance. The town helps facilitate these roles so that the community receives the support through education required so that we can all live in coexistence with wildlife. The town has identified the following groups who have an active role in wildlife management. Those would be the Oakville Humane Society, property owners, external agencies such as Coyote Watch or Oakville Green, the Ministry of Natural Resources, and Halton Regional Police. Let's go through what these groups that we have listed on the screen are responsible for. The town of Oakville is responsible for, as mentioned earlier, investigations as outlined in our updated coyote response strategy, maintaining the coyote tracking form, a reporting form, and relevant data, community outreach and public engagement, and also installing signage, managing secure garbage bins in parks, etc. Property owners are a part of this as well, and that their responsibility is really to try to remove attractants for wildlife and coyotes, and it's really managing their own property. As well, also to keep a close eye on any animals, any pets that are in the backyard that are obviously not on a leash at that time, so that they can ensure the safety of their pets. The Oakville Humane Society is responsible for attending to sick or injured animals, and then enforcement of town bylaws relating to domestic pets, such as pets off leash or dogs off leash, and the removal of dead animals from public roadways. They also assist in an educational component of the program. We also leverage external partners to assist with scientific expertise, community education and hazing, and investigations. The Ministry of Natural Resources assists with policy and legislation and supports with educational materials. And lastly, Halton Regional Police Services can assist in situations where there are immediate threats to personal safety. They are the only agency permitted to use firearms within the town. Through good teamwork, we can all help in making our community and creating an empowered group effort to live in coexistence with wildlife. The Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act allows for property owners the ability to harass, capture, or kill wildlife, including coyotes and foxes, on their own property as a last result. This would be when the coyotes or foxes or other wildlife are creating a negative impact on a residential or private property. If a coyote is captured, it is the responsibility of the property owner to ensure that within 24 hours of capture, the animal is released within 1 kilometer of the capture location and or euthanized. Either of these options would be required to be in compliance with all applicable regulations and local bylaws. Even with these options available, it should be noted that the success rate for trapping and or relocating of coyotes in urban environments is generally quite low, and longer-term solutions to prevent ongoing issues in the community would still need to be addressed. Research has found that when a coyote is moved from its territory, it opens up room for another coyote or coyote family to move into the territory. It is for this reason that relocation or even euthanizing is not a viable option. With this, the main objective of the coyote program in Oakville is to support the community with living with wildlife. The program encourages coexistence of people, pets, and wildlife. Through the town's program, the town does not promote the removal of coyotes or wildlife, as removal or trapping is not a part of this program, and for the main reasons that traps pose an immediate risk to pets and people, Use of firearms is prohibited, except for by the local police services, as mentioned earlier, and it leaves a void for other coyotes outside the territory to fill. The town's coyote program, through the Coyote Education and Response Strategy, works within a framework of managing coyotes on municipal land, policy and legislation, enforcement of property standard and lot maintenance bylaws, management tools and programs, including coordination of reporting, investigations of reported den sites and coyotes approaching within 2 meters, and education. Again, it should be noted that the town will only consider trapping in specific circumstances as outlined in the new Coyote Education and Response Procedure. We live side by side with coyotes and will often see coyotes in our neighborhood. In these instances, it is good practice to use hazing techniques to discourage the coyote from becoming comfortable. Hazing is a method that makes use of deterrence to move an animal out of an area or discourage an undesirable behavior or activity. Hazing can instill or reinstill natural fear of humans. Action that a resident can take if they encounter a coyote in the community can be raising their voice, waving their arms in the air, taking an umbrella and swiftly opening and closing, carrying a shopping bag or garbage bag that can be used to fill with air repeatedly and create a loud sound, spray water on a resting coyote, blow a whistle. These tools will help individuals to know what to do when they encounter a coyote and to help keep properties from becoming somewhat of a sunning site for these coyotes. It is important to know that hazing actions should not be used in a natural area or green space that would be the coyote's normal habitat. In order to further assist residents to understand the coyote program in Oakville, staff have developed a coyote education and response procedure. This procedure incorporates strategies that directly address the primary reasons coyotes come into conflict with people and looks to define each report type with the level of response attached to each. Emphasis for the program is focused on public education and awareness and responding appropriately when interacting with wildlife. Key preventative practices such as limiting food, shelter, water, and avoiding leaving small pets unattended or roaming free are key to minimizing potential negative interactions between people, pets, and coyotes. The Coyote Response Strategy chart then sets out clearly the town response to incidents with coyotes. This framework will address concerns raised by the community that it is unclear if the town would take action in a worst-case scenario of a coyote biting a human. This new simplified approach should provide greater clarity to the public and support current education and communication programs in responding to public concerns with coyotes. The reporting tool was introduced in 2012 to serve as a multi-use tool alongside the coyote management strategy. The reporting system remains a key part of the coyote education and response procedure today. It provides the residents an opportunity to submit their coyote interactions and view other submissions via the online map. It also provides staff the opportunity to investigate more serious reports of coyote interactions. Even with an increase in the number of reports, we must remember that many reports likely involve reports of the same coyote, whether it be several reports submitted on the same day in an area or reports submitted by the same person. As part of this initiative, the Coyote Reporting Form was launched to provide a central reporting system and provide data to better direct the town's efforts. This reporting form has been regularly upgraded and remains in effect, as I mentioned earlier. It offers residents the opportunity to provide their reports and to also, as mentioned, you can see the dots on the screen, that those would be potential locations where reports have been submitted. That data is used by staff to really actively look at key locations that may require distribution of flyers or further education. And as mentioned earlier, if there's more in-depth or more critical reports submitted, then to take perhaps start an investigation or perhaps set up a public outreach or community meeting. The response from the town will increase, as mentioned, based on the strategy, and will include more in-depth investigations relating to den sites or interactions with domestic pets or people. As mentioned earlier, the proposed coyote education and response strategy and attached coyote response strategy was developed as a result of public feedback. Public education and outreach were always the main pillar of the coyote program in Oakville. But over the last year, when town staff became more aware of the residents were unsure of provincial regulations and town actions based on reports submitted, it became evident that more consultation was required. It was at this time that staff arranged for several stakeholder meetings with members of the community and external agencies such as the Ministry of Natural Resources. And staff also created the coyote education and response procedure and associated response strategy, which we have discussed earlier, as well as planned virtual public meetings over this past month to help educate and inform the residents of Oakville on how to maintain a coexistence with wildlife and coyotes. Further to this, enforcement staff have attended a number of neighborhoods to distribute flyers and speak with residents on an individual basis to answer any questions they may have. There have been also a number of investigations initiated as a result of reports of den sightings or a physical interaction. These additional actions, facilitated through staff and municipal enforcement services and other partner departments, demonstrate the commitment from the town to support the community to live in successful coexistence with the community. The last part of the presentation today refers to the proposed recommendation brought forward tonight relating to the decision before council, simply to receive the report before you today. I thank you for your time today. That was a lot of information, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, it looks like you did leave room for questions, and Councillor Chisholm is first off the bat. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. Very detailed report and a lot of empirical evidence, and I'm glad this has come forward. I guess what the real challenge we have with our residents is they have their little puppies on a leash, and there's the big, huge coyote comes out in the street and sees it and wants it for dinner. The bottom line, I think, with some of our residents, they want to see coyotes eradicated from Oakville, which, of course, we know it can't happen. And I understand it's a very emotional issue with a lot of our pet owners. And this information that you provided and the next steps, I find very positive. But really where we've had some challenges too is says, who has the ultimate authority with respect to the whole coyote situation? In the municipality, is it the province, is it the municipality, or is it the feds and so forth? And we've had some residents going to different ministries and so forth, and they seem to be passed around and without any commitment or answers. So what I'm hearing today in this report, that it's under bylaw enforcement, okay, I use the word enforcement, is that this whole issue is now within the realm of the authority of the municipality. So I think that message has to be important because some people don't like the answers they get from our staff at the town and on council, of course, and they're looking for other avenues at the province and at the feds to override us or contravene what we have. So I think that message has to be very clearly articulated in some shape or form, and I think you're on the right track, but I think there's some definite steps in saying, no, we're not going to eradicate coyotes. No, we're not going to do this. No, unless there are those circumstances that prevail with respect to following the processes and procedures that have been laid out with the town. That's the education thing. People want to see, the heck with all the processes, just get rid of the coyotes. That's not going to happen, and I think we need to do we started in an appropriate manner, but I think it's going to have to be continued. This is going to be a moving target for a while with respect to the coyotes. And what I'm afraid is going to happen one of these days, and we better be prepared for it, there's going to be somebody who's going to be attacked or bitten by a coyote. And it probably has happened without maybe with any major reporting, but that will set it off very quickly because people that have pets are starting to, how do I say, talk to each other, and they're organizing. So I just want that to be upfront, that there could be a concern with respect to that organization. So what I'm saying, this is good information, but I think we still need to move forward in keeping the community apprised of what we're doing, and that the town is taking good steps. And the end result is that we're the authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Anyone else? Councillor Hazlet-Thiel and then Councillor O'Meara.
Margaret, thanks very much for the comprehensive report. And I do want to thank all of the town staff that have engaged with the Joshua Creek Residents Association that brought forward in February a comprehensive report of their own, asking the town to look into these various areas. And you have, and you've answered in large part many of their questions. In particular, I want to compliment that we now have seasonal communication. We have large signage that goes up, and we do have clarity on some definitions and protocols. There are some areas, though, that still remain opportunities. When we talk about hazing and we talk about individuals, and one of the examples you used is spraying a coyote that may be on your front lawn, and I think we could all agree that is fraught with anxiety for most people. You think, I'm going to spray this thing and it's going to lunge at me. A little hard to believe that they're just going to kind of get up and wander away. And JCRA has tried to say several times that people are incredibly uncomfortable with hazing. And we talk about showing them the video. We talk about here's how. In the report, you talk about increasing the support around hazing. So can you put a little bit more information on that? Like if they're calling in and reporting and we have an habituated coyote, how quickly are you identifying that? And what is the town support on reconditioning, I believe is the words that are used in coyote science, to make that coyote afraid of humans?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We do have, as part of our comprehensive plan, we have, and we always really have, used education through whether it be stakeholder meetings or whether it be more town hall meetings to try to educate the public. And so I look at this as an opportunity that perhaps we can expand maybe even our virtual series to look at maybe having a bit of a step-by-step to help educate the public on specific actions because while I can appreciate it's all on paper, sometimes that doesn't necessarily translate into the, the real environment. Further to that, if we have, for any instances where we have received reports that are on the more extreme spectrum of what we've identified as various report types, we do immediately initiate an investigation. And part of that investigation is to look immediately at any sort of reason why a coyote may have turned to that type of action. And so what that means is we're going to be looking at any garbage cans that are not secured, any garbage that might be on the street. In a number of instances, there have been locations where perhaps a resident has put out their garbage well in advance of their garbage pickup day. And that is an example, is something that we would move forward with action and communicating to that resident that that is activity, first of all, that's prohibited, but secondly, there's, subsequent implications to that. And so it's an opportunity to educate. But I mean, certainly we would be open to any sort of, for instance, if there was a residents association or a specific community that would like a more one-on-one, perhaps sort of tutorial, we could also look at that. If we do run into a situation where repeatedly we do find, there's a concentrated number of sightings, perhaps the scenario is escalating with one particular coyote, we would also call in further resources from some of our external partners to try to help to haze and or try to recondition that coyote to go back into their natural habitat, being the green spaces.
Thank you for that. And I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just, it is truly, it is one thing to read on paper and to watch on video. It is absolutely different to stand there and have to be within feet of something that you are terrified of. And you complicate that by the fact that while I very much support that you're walking your dog, it has to be on a leash. You need to be aware. But when you think about what they have to go through, they got the dog, they got the baby stroller, and we want them to haze. It's a little, it goes beyond the word. It's not, doesn't feel very livable. But even if that is where we're going to land, that they must be comfortable hazing, we have to elevate the support around hazing, or else we are going to continue to have habituated coyotes lazing around on lawns and then getting too comfortable. My other questions are around the wildlife feeding. I really encourage us to move quicker on that as a bylaw. If the premise of everything is prevention, and we know that feeding is conditioning the coyote to show up at your front door to get food, and trust me, that is, from what we gather, an accurate statement, then we need to make feeding wildlife heavily fined. A bylaw is amazing. They'll stop, they'll check garbage, all of the backyards. There needs to be a fine for somebody who is putting out food, and it needs to be clear so that ownership of their role is greater. And I'm worried that it's going to fall off a bit off the radar. My other comment is on shadowing. As more and more people become familiar with coyotes, the shadowing is, there are folks who see this shadowing as aggressive. And in the document, it infers that it's not. But in fact, it could be if they're shadowing them to make them go away from the den, or have I misunderstood the science?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So with respect to shadowing, generally speaking, it is something that is as a means to it's not intended to be aggressive. When we are in pupping season, the behavior of coyotes, more so for the parents, may become a little bit more heightened. But relatively speaking, that wouldn't necessarily be an instance where they would shadow. There would be other behaviors present that would indicate more protective type of behavior. Shadowing is just really curiosity, is more so anything of what it is. And by including it in the response or in the definitions in the new procedure was to try to highlight what that means to the public. Perhaps further clarification could also be supported on our webpage and other communications to help address that concern from the public.
Okay. If a dog bites another dog, what is the action that is taken?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there would be an investigation undertaken, generally led by the Humane Society, to investigate exactly what happened, and then further action would be taken based on the results of the investigation.
So is it fair to say we're treating coyotes better than dogs?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the evidence indicated in both the report and in the presentation indicates that the risk of bites or incidents involving coyotes to either an animal or a person are insignificant in comparison to dogs that bite or incidents with dog bites. So I think if we really want to compare, it's difficult to compare the two because one obviously is part of our ecology and our wildlife, where other is a domestic animal. The reason for the purpose for the educational component is to help people understand that there is a very small risk from that happening. But if attractants are introduced into the community, those risks obviously will increase because coyotes will become more familiar with people or become more comfortable. So we really want to encourage the educational piece to try to promote an understanding of how to live in an environment while keeping coyotes in their environment and then maintaining our own.
I'll let my fellow councillors jump in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. There's quite a few of them lined up. Councillor Sanju, Councillor Giddings, and Councillor O'Meara. Actually, Councillor O'Meara, you were next, then Councillor Sanju, then Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just pick up on Councillor Hazlett's last line of question. Do we know roughly how many dogs are in Oakville to give a ratio comparison on a bites per ownership compared to coyotes and bites per how many coyotes we know?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do not have that statistic in front of me. However, that is something that can be obtained through our colleagues at the Humane Society.
I bet we'd likely find the ratio is probably similar. I mean, the number 2 compared to 248 looks big, but when we count how many dogs there are and how many coyotes we're aware of in town, I bet you'll find that the ratio is probably very close. My next question, we talk a lot about investigations and the town doing investigations, and we're going to investigate. And I just want to set one thing aside for a minute. It's not necessarily that there are garbage bags open in Coyotes. It is a Bugs Bunny buffet down here. Every single corner, there are bunnies all over the place, eating vegetable gardens all over the place. So you can have not a drop of garbage on the street, and you'll have coyotes in everyone's backyard trying to get the bunnies that are everywhere. So what is it that investigations actually achieve?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the investigation affords the opportunity for a few things. Staff not only look for, the evidence of garbage or other attractants that would unnaturally be present, but otherwise they are also looking for, perhaps if it's pupping season, the evidence of a den site. They are looking to also look at that opportunity as a way to further communicate on that one-on-one principle by distribution of flyers, and to also speak to those residents through the distribution of flyers to understand what their concerns are. And from that, then we can take away, do we need to have a broader public meeting? Do we need to engage in some of our external partners to try to understand more the science of the behavior that is occurring in that location? But there's a number of things through the investigation that we would be looking at.
So, yeah, I know we look at a number of investigations, and I'm just trying to explain the sense of frustration that a lot of residents I have. They get a lot of talk and a lot of handouts, and yet they continue to see coyotes going down the street with rabbits, coyotes lurking in bushes, feigning at children with parents as they walk by, and they get a lot of pieces of paper and a lot of conversations, and their frustration is it always seems to stop there. And when we look in the response strategy, I mean, even if a coyote has bitten a person or has a physical interaction, we go through there and there's nothing is going to happen to the coyote. And I think when people read that and they look into the response, they say that's not good enough, and they want more. They want to at least see that more could happen if a child gets bitten in the leg, or if somebody does. I mean, we go above and beyond to protect kids on sidewalks, on their bikes. We go above and beyond to protect kids in all aspects. But this seems to be one where the wildlife wins, and it will win because the variety of reasons that we've gone through. So, I mean, have we thought about maybe a fence program for properties that back along woodlots where we could put some sort of a tall barrier to at least allow the coyotes not to jump over a 4-foot fence, grab a dog, and be gone in about before somebody could turn around? I mean, have we got any sort of tangible, this is what we're going to do to try and prevent this, rather than just here's a patio, or here's a paper, and let's talk to you and put up a sign? I mean, I'm looking for teeth here of what people's expectation is, and I'm not seeing it. So are we going to be able to deliver something that will make people feel like it's just more than a conversation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So through our investigation, and I know more notably in a recent issue, staff have been working diligently with the homeowner to look at opportunities to perhaps increase the height of their fence. Sometimes, because of a lot of the properties back onto green space, there's an involvement from parks to look at opportunities and receive permission. However, we do have obviously a good dialogue between the two groups, and that is something as an example, one of our more recent issues that we are still working with the resident to understand what they can do to increase their feeling of safety in their backyard. And we must keep in mind that coyotes can jump fences but having said that, I mean, if it does mean that the resident has an opportunity, if they haven't already gone to the maximum that they're permitted for their fence, if there's an opportunity there, I mean, we will work to help them understand what they would be permitted to do, and if they chose to increase the height of their fence, as an example, that they could do so. They could move forward with that on their own. With respect to the ultimate outcome, if you really want to sort of go to that extreme, if there was an issue that a report came in and a child was bitten or something to that level, I think that we did identify that in the strategy. If there was everything that any time, if ever, we have not had, thank God, a report like that for many, many years. But if that type of report was to come in, the investigation would, first of all, work rapidly. And secondly, would immediately involve external partners, and we would be looking at what the best possible outcome for the community would be. We obviously are looking to secure the safety of the community. If there was a situation that there was bodily injury to a person, we may move forward with looking at trapping that animal and/or further actions. So it is something that would be looked at if we did receive a report that was of critical in nature.
Okay, thank you. And just so I'm clear, my last question, if a private property owner wants to go through with the trapping process themselves, they are allowed to do that under this bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is something that actually the Ministry of Natural Resources sets out the regulations for. And yes, a private property owner can look at hiring a trapper to, as a means to, protect their property and remove a wild animal from their property if they so choose.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor, I just want to underline, the restriction there by the ministry is only from their property. And I guess, not to make too much light of this, it started to sound there for a minute like we were going to build a wall and make the green space pay for it. Councillor Sanju, what have you got for the?
Thank you, Mayor Burton, and thank you for your levity. I enjoyed that. I understand and I hear this issue very loud and clear with 3 young kids of my own. It's challenging being in, I think, any part of Oakville. With new developments closer in this ward, we're seeing a lot of the coyotes move into areas because they're coming out of the newly developed areas because that's their space. I'm wondering if you can kind of help me. I'm going to kind of tag on to some of my councillor colleagues' comments and maybe work a little bit backwards. Do we know by any chance what height fence a coyote can jump?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is unclear as to the exact extent of how high they can jump, but certainly all evidence supports the fact that they can jump a fence. But I don't have specifics on, what their limit would be.
I think that would be helpful to residents. Just to have that information, because if they do go down the path of wanting to fence in their yard, then they have that opportunity available to them. I think we would be challenged from a council perspective and from a town perspective to mandate fence sizes, especially with people with ravine or woodlots, because quite frankly, from a development perspective, at least the folks here in our ward are paying an exorbitant premium to have that woodlot and non-fenced space. So for us to mandate that, I think would be a challenge to many, many, many residents. Do we also, and I kind of want to work on, I think Councillor Theo actually mentioned this earlier, about dogs versus coyotes and our treatment from the town. So I'm just trying to understand this from the legal lens and from the bylaw lens. We are able to ticket owners because owners own the dogs. If a dog is biting another dog, or biting a human, we're able to have that level of recourse from our perspective. We don't have that same level of recourse when it comes to coyote because they don't have owners. So I think that everybody is looking for some level of recourse that we can take to for this. And I think that's where we're all challenged. So we understand the work that everyone has put into this, and we understand that staff has put in this level of detail to the work, but we are still hearing from residents and ourselves, we're seeing it ourselves living in town, that there is no recourse here. So if we could get a little bit more detail, maybe in the future, about how we can get some level of recourse. I understand that trapping situation might be one option, but Mayor Burton kind of left it, or really hit the nail on the head. We'd have to do that per person basis. Do you have any more information from other municipalities on this?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, as part of the report, we did conduct a municipal scan of best practices in other municipalities relating to coyote programs. In general, many municipalities employ a similar type of program where they do look to educate, they look to various different bylaws to enforce specific behavior in efforts to assist the community with creating a safe environment for everybody to live in. I think I'll ask Selena to jump in with some further comments.
Thanks, Margaret. I just wanted to add to that. There's been a lot of discussion about how far will we go and whether or not euthanasia is on the table and that there is no recourse for residents. And I think we need to be clear here that even though Margaret's saying, yes, we're going to do the investigation, yes, we're going to educate, these are all things we're hoping to do to prevent that negative interaction, to prevent us having to go to the extent of having to euthanize. But we should be clear that that is on the table. So if there's an incident that is significant enough that there is a public safety risk, it's certainly an option that we would investigate. So it's not that we wouldn't do it.
Okay,
And
thank
it is
you,
in the
thank you both for
policy.
that. That was very helpful to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who's next? Councillor Giddings, the first timer. Councillor Hazard-Thiel, if you've got more, we'll come back to you after every other first timer is gone. But Council, we're way over the time limits of our procedure by law, if you care about that. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Margaret, are we, your comments about the report a coyote form, are we proactive in that in terms of reaching out to areas where we see a higher number of coyotes being reported?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we are. I do currently have an officer that does review the data submitted, and we do look for various hotspots, so to speak. We are also in the midst of developing to automate that process so that we do receive reports more so on the escalated end of the spectrum, but also to automate reports that are sent on a scheduled basis so that we can really look at areas that might be emerging as hotspots.
Thank you. You mentioned that you were going to be coming back to council later this year or in a year's time with some suggestions possibly on bylaw or a revised feeding bylaw. Did I hear that correctly?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we do have plans to review our lot maintenance and property standards bylaw, and through that review, we are committed to look at strengthening regulations with respect to feeding of wildlife. So we would be reviewing, conducting a municipal scan and looking at what the best options would be as a way to house those regulations.
All right, could we also look at the reporting structure? If we go back over the past 3 years, reportings have been down by about 60%. I don't think that the number of sightings have decreased. I know hearing from residents that the first time they report it, they expect something to occur in terms of some sort of response by HRPS or the Humane Society or hazing or whatever. They don't understand the purpose of the reporting. I'm concerned that the number has dropped. Last year was 331 sightings. I could triple that number, by reporting the coyotes that are in the woodlot behind us on a daily basis. So I'm concerned that it's losing the data that is necessary. And I was just wondering if we could look at different data points that could assist us with this, because as you know, 10 people could report one coyote marching down the street at the same time, and it shows up as 10 entries. There was a comment earlier about the town being the authority. I didn't quite understand, hear the response of that. We have no ability to go out and cull coyotes at this point from private property. If I understand correctly, people can hire a trapper on their own for their private property. But if we were to, going through with Blondie a few years ago at Oakville Trafalgar High School, watching staff trying to capture that, it's pretty well a futile operation, isn't it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it is quite difficult to capture a healthy coyote, and to further that, it is also difficult. It's compounded by the fact that we're in an urban setting, and so there's safety concerns as well surrounding that. So we do really look at as Selena had mentioned earlier, we really look at trying to get ahead of a situation evolving to that point. And that's why the program is so heavily weighted on the education and the public outreach and supporting the community in any way possible, because we really don't want to ever get to a situation like that. But if you hear stories from the Humane Society, when mange was an issue a few years ago, to capture a sick or injured coyote, as an example, is tricky enough. So you could imagine the difficulty with a well and healthy coyote trying to capture them.
Thank you very much. And when staff comes back later in the year, would you update us on the other communities again that you're been following or tracking in terms of if anyone's doing anything differently?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Giddings, are you referring to the regulations for feeding, or just a point to clarify? Sorry.
Oh, by all means. You mentioned earlier that you had checked with other municipalities in terms of best practices and what they have in place, and that we are very similar, or all the municipalities are similar in the actions. Just wondering if part of that report could include if there's anything different being done with any positive effect.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if council so wishes to direct staff to report back on a municipal scan with coyote programs, that is something that is possible.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Mayor. Could we include that as staff direction?
Is there anybody else before we return to Councillor Haslett-Deal? Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. Just as an answer to Councillor Sandu, who asked how high they can jump. A coyote can jump 1.8 meters or 5.9 feet. So you're pretty close to a 6-foot fence they can jump. But what you're not realizing, they can also dig very fast underneath the fence unless it's buried in the ground over a foot. So the fencing issue, I don't think our fence bylaws is high enough or underground enough to stop them from a fence. And the only thing that's going to clean up the coyotes are going to be the wolves. And that's the only thing that actually scares coyotes anymore. When they hear a wolf howl, they get quiet. So anyhow, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haslett-Deal, you have additional questions?
So two other points. One is the JCRA has reported that they actually jumped a 6'6" fence. So we now know that they're good jumpers. In the report, Margaret, are we going to leave the column that said that a neighbor can call in and report feeding or garbage? It seemed like it was going to come out in what was written, and so can you just clarify that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the reports of feeding of wildlife or any other attractant is always available to report. It's not specific to coyotes, and so we really have left that as a general overarching. It would be a report straight to bylaw to investigate that.
It's just really handy when you've got the chart that you click and you know that you can report feeding. It's just food for thought. And sort of my second last comment is there's a phrase in the report that talks about provoke, and the investigation will look if a human provoked. And one of the examples I believe is that if I'm rescuing a pet, that might be perceived as provoking. That's a little unsettling to me. I don't know anybody who has a pet that wouldn't try to rescue the pet from the coyote. And so I would just caution that that's not provoking. That's trying to save a loved one. Sometimes the way things are phrased sound very much that a resident has to justify their care and concern for their well-being and their safety. And I'm not saying this is is you, as Margaret, you did an excellent job in taking us through the report. It's just, we need to be cautious that, you know, we represent residents, not coyotes. And I'm a bit concerned some of the language feels very much that someone would have to justify their interaction with a coyote to save their pet, and that would be deemed provoking. And it's not. It's saving a loved one. So I want to thank you for your report. I would hope that when you report back on a municipal scan of other municipalities, you also report back on sort of the status of wildlife feeding and hazing. And I'd like to have that added as a request.
Mr. Barry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Just for some clarity, as Margaret has indicated, the intent is to come back with either an updated property standards lot maintenance bylaw or a separate wildlife feeding bylaw. I would say at that time it's probably the best time to bring back the comprehensive municipal scan that will feed into the evidence that will be included as part of the feeding bylaw. So I know the intent was to do that next year. I think that's probably some good timeline considering the evidence that's been provided at this point, and all that can be updated on a reasonable interval. So I would say that if possible, I would recommend that it be next year along with that change.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. If there are no other questions, is there a mover and seconder to receive the report? Councillor Giddings moves it. Councillor Hazeltine seconds. Is there any objection to receiving the report? Madam Clerk, there is none, and the report is received. Council, I just want to say, I hope the newspapers don't make it sound like we want green space without nature, because there is a risk here of how we're going to seem here, I think. But anyway, let's turn our attention now to item 7. This is an item for receipt. There's no action item here until the required public review, which doesn't end until October 15th. There is a presentation available if you want it from Diana Friesen, who's our water resources technologist. But otherwise, show me a hand if you want the presentation, and show me 2 hands if you want to move receipt. Okay, Councillor O'Meara moves receipt. Councillor Robertson followed instructions. She showed me 2 hands, and she gets to second it. Are there any objections to receipt of the report? Madam Clerk, there are none, and the item is received. Jill Stephen is here. She's our Director of Engineering and Construction. She's available to answer questions about the traffic bylaw update that you have before you. The recommendation is to pass it. Councillor Chisholm?
I move the recommendation.
Thank you, sir. Is there a seconder? Councillor Palmer, thank you. Is there...
Worship, can I just ask a question?
Well, I was about to ask if there's questions, but sure, go ahead, jump in front of it. And you can go first.
Sorry, I know sometimes these things can go quick. I was just wondering if Director Stevens might be able to give an update on when we can expect the pilot project back for the 40-kilometer-an-hour communities. I can't remember when we had passed that, but I know I think it was in 2019. So,
Director Stephen, welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. The pilot studies were due to be reported back actually at this meeting of council. However, due to the changes in traffic patterns that we've observed during the pandemic, we have been unable to get reliable traffic data. The traffic volumes have decreased to the extent that we have not been able to conduct the needed traffic studies and surveys to get that information for you. We're continuing to monitor the traffic volumes and to work with the other municipalities to make sure we're consistent in when we return to offering that service. But at this point, we're looking at the fall at the earliest because we want to get through the summertime. That's always been a time where we we postponed those surveys because of vacations and changes in travel patterns at that time.
Okay, so I apologize. Was it that the traffic volumes are too few, or that we haven't done the surveys?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the plan had been to do the surveys in the spring. When the traffic volumes decreased, we did not feel that we could rely on that as being representative of what traffic patterns would be like going forward. So we're waiting for them to stabilize, and then we'll conduct the surveys.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Council, this is the bylaw, not an item about traffic surveys and studies, just to help you with your meeting efficiency. Councillor Elgar and then Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. I just want to say I'm so happy to see this report and also the locations on it. And I just wonder, can you explain what this really means? Like community safety zone, you know, nice buzzwords, but what does that mean we can do and the police can do going forward? Because like since the COVID-19 kicked in, it seems like a lot of people seem to think they've got a much more reason to speed because the streets are empty. And it's been ridiculous, some of the speeds I've read about, the emails coming in. So what does this really do for the community going forward? And when does it become effective tomorrow? Like how quickly, Ms. Stevens, is this going to kick in?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the community safety zone designation allows for the fines for traffic offenses to be doubled in that area. So that includes speeding. It also includes things such as seatbelts. So it does help to hopefully improve safety in that area because it will encourage drivers to respect the law more so because the penalty will be greater. This is just one step that we're taking to address the traffic issues around these schools on major collectors, minor arterials. As part of this work, we'll also be adding in the permanent radar speed display signs at these schools that are included within the community safety zones. So that will be something that's coming over the next few months. We're working on letters now to the residents of these neighborhoods so that they can be aware that the signage is coming for the community safety zones, and so they'll be aware of the radar speed signs as well and know where those will be placed. So this is.
So when does it become effective?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, once the traffic bylaw is passed today, then that would be in effect, but the signage will take a little while to get up. We're working with our Roads and Works folks to do that now.
Councillor, somehow or other you've accidentally muted yourself. Councillor Elgar.
Okay. I just wonder, just curious, what does a little while mean, Ms. Stevens? Like a week, a month, 2 months? Just so we can get a feel for it, because we got some big issues in our ward.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have 18 or 14 new zones to put up, so it will take a few months to do all of them, but we have done the advanced planning, so our Roads and Works crews are aware that this work is coming and have been able to do some advanced prep for that.
I thank you, and the sooner the better. Thanks very much.
Councillor, did I say Palmer next? And then Longo, and
yes,
then
thank you.
Adams.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question actually is just, and Director Stevens, I understand if you want to just get back to me on this later, but in terms of the 14 zones, how were they really decided? Because I don't see the new school in Ward 7 in that zone, and I'm just a little bit curious as to why it's not, or maybe it was considered, but it's a high density area, and there's certainly a lot of traffic in that area. So I just wanted some understanding as to if it was considered and if it could be considered at a later date. I understand the school's not open yet, so maybe a study wasn't conducted.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, these zones were approved last year, so at that point the school wasn't there yet, but we would obviously be monitoring that and conducting the studies to see whether this would qualify under the same criteria that we use to identify these 14 zones.
And does that happen at a given time in the year, or would it just be based on complaints or feedback from residents, the study?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, we would conduct the speed surveys once the school is open and we have a sense of traffic patterns stabilizing.
Great, thank you so much.
Councillor Longo?
Thank you, Your Worship. Director Stevens, just adding on to what Councillor Elgar had mentioned, because Ward 4, we've gotten quite a few complaints about speeding, especially West Oak Trails and Grand Oak Boulevard. So how do we measure the effectiveness of these zones as you put them in? And that's, you don't have to answer that if you can just talk about how we measure that. And then how is it coordinated with the police? So how do we ensure that there's a larger presence? Because there are more and more witnessing people driving at extreme speeds in these areas, because as Councillor Elgar mentioned, there's less cars on the road. So I want to make sure that we have a way of indicating to our residents that these are actually effective, and this will help alleviate the concerns we have of children being in these areas where cars are speeding more prominently in those areas.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the short-term actions would be that we would follow up with our friends at HRPS following receipt of this report and the update of the bylaw to let them know that the 14 zones have been added as community safety zones. We have identified those with them previously, but we'll let them know the status of them following today's meeting. We would also conduct speed surveys once the zones are in and once the radar speed signs are activated, so that we are monitoring the effectiveness of them, and we can report back on that after we have a chance to do a few of those studies and see what the lasting effect of that is. We'll also be advising the residents, as I mentioned, that these are coming, and so that they'll be watching for the new signage, and hopefully that will help as well. And then this is one step along the traffic calming progression for these areas. These were all schools that we identified previously as having some physical traffic calming in place, medians or bike lanes or others, but still exhibiting higher speeds than we wanted to see in these areas. And so they are ones that we are continuing to keep a close eye on, and that we will be looking to continue to enhance this as we move forward. And that's something we had talked about in the report last year, about bringing forward 1 or 2 sites each year to be put into the budget, to be working with the communities, both the school and the community that lives in the area, on what the solutions are, because we know that while everybody wants to slow down in a school zone, we also know that we want to develop a solution that fits best with each individual community.
Okay, thank you.
Next is Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the report, and I fully support the traffic bylaw update. I just have a question for you about the area around Joshua Creek Public School, and it's specifically Arrowhead and Pinery Crescent, the area in front of Pinery Park, where we've identified that area as an area that's needing additional physical traffic calming, and we're about to enter into a process to engage with the residents later this year or early next year to try and figure out what that looks like. Would creation of a community safety zone in that location be one of the things that we could do to respond to the traffic calming need for that particular community? And if so, how would we enter into that process?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the zones that are in the traffic bylaw update report today are all major collectors or minor arterials. Pinery would be a minor collector, and so would be a candidate for different physical traffic calming measures than the other streets. So that's why it was not included originally in the group that's in this package. So I think with Pinery, what we would do is run it through the traffic calming process and identify what options are there first before moving ahead to a community safety zone.
Is community safety zone a new option under that process or not? Or could it become one?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we had really kept the two of them separate. It wasn't sort of an either or designation. So it would it would be something we would evaluate in addition to, I would say, as opposed to as part of.
And so I think I heard, sorry, we might be coming in and out of audio here, but did I understand you to say that you were going to next year, when things are kind of more back to normal with respect to local traffic, that you're going to do traffic study on some of these locations to determine the before and after effect on speed and volume?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have the before numbers for all of these areas, so we would do the after once they were in place, and would plan to do so at regular intervals so that we could keep an eye on them as
So
we're
it
moving.
might be, sorry, it might be spring of 2021 that you might do that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, that seems like a reasonable timeline right now.
All right, so we might have a better understanding of what the community safety zone designation does with respect to traffic levels and traffic speed at that time. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Councillor Knoll?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the report. I just want to pick up on something you said, that you'll be installing, or the staff will be installing speed signs at all community safety zones, or is it just the new ones?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's at the 20 schools on major collectors and minor arterials that were identified last year. So there are a couple of schools that are not listed in this report because they already have community safety zones. So Munns being one example on 6th line.
No, I was specifically referring to the speed radar boards. I think you'd mentioned that they would be installed at those locations.
Yes, through you.
So,
yep, that's correct.
Will they be installed at all community safety zones, or just, or was that your response?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, not at all community safety zones, but at community safety zones on major collectors or minor arterials that had a school in them. There are a couple that are not, that don't meet all three of those criteria.
Okay, and that includes previous community safety zones as well as the new ones on this list?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Can I ask, you had mentioned, I didn't hear what you actually said about Munns, but is Munns and Sunningdale on those lists by any chance?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Munns is on the list, but Sunningdale is not.
Okay, and last question, the new signs that are being purchased for this project, because I assume you're having to buy several new ones as a result of this new initiative, are they the ones that can be retrofit in the future with speed radar cameras? I know some of them can be and some of them can't. I'm curious if these ones are future-proofed for that purpose.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the radar speed display signs that we're purchasing for these locations are the same as the ones that we already have deployed. But they're in addition to, they're not depleting the ones that we rotate through town right now.
Excellent. But as the signs that are being purchased, or even the signs that we have in the past, are they the ones that can be retrofit for photo radar?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if we were to enter into a photo radar program, we would have to use the cameras that have been specified in the RFP that the City of Toronto has, and they're different from these. They look like a big box. They're not embedded in the signs that display your speed as you go by.
No, I understand that. Maybe I'm not making myself clear. I'm getting cut out, but I know some of the speed radar signs have a future-proof ability, so that at some point in the future, when there's a decision to proceed with photo radar, the signs can simply be updated. I know that I've had the sales pitch at AMO and from some of these vendors. I wasn't sure if these signs have that capability for future proofing. Should we have the ability to go down that road in the future? Yeah. No pun intended.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, these are separate, distinct, different signs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Is it decision time? Is there a mover and seconder for the traffic bylaw? Councillor Knoll and Councillor Robertson, thank you. Is there any objection to adopting the traffic bylaw? Madam Clerk, there's no objection and the traffic bylaw is adopted. Council, we now turn to item number 10, the rent relief for town commercial tenants during the COVID-19 pandemic. You have the report from the legal department. Ryan Maynard, the Assistant Town Solicitor, is available if you have questions. And if you do not, a mover and seconder are welcome. Councillor Knoll moves, Councillor Sanju seconds. Are there any objections to adopting the report? Madam Clerk, there are no objections. The report is approved. Council, we're making progress. We've now reached new business, and we need a mover and seconder, if you'd be so kind, for the following motion. That in accordance with Section 2.2 of the Procedure Bylaw, the rules of procedure established in Section 14.1 sub 2 be waived to permit the consideration of the following notices of motions upon their introduction today. May I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Dudek and Councillor Grant, thank you. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and the procedures are waived. The first motion, moved by Councillor Jasvinder Sanju and seconded by Councillor Pavan Parmar, is in honor of Veronica Tyrell. Councillor Sanju, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mayor Burton. Just a few brief comments on this. I think that the motion speaks for itself. But I did want to add a certain level of personal commentary to this. Speaking as a woman of color, anyone would be able to see the force that Veronica Tyrell was in this community and every community. She contributed much to Oakville, much to the Caribbean Association here in Oakville, and much to every person of color here in Oakville. With that, Councillor Parmar and I speak for both of us, I think, when I say that we are pleased and happy to bring this forward so that we can name a park after her here in the town, as it is so, so well deserved.
Thank you, Councillor Sanju. Councillor Parmar?
Thank you, Worship. I'm pleased to second this motion. I never had the opportunity to meet Ms. Tyrell, but I know and have heard from many that she worked hard to bring people together with the goal of achieving inclusivity, tolerance, and social change. She was instrumental in building the CCAH and was a leader in the celebration of Black history. I think now more than ever, we need to remember and act on the ideas and issues that she advocated for. So I'm pleased to second this motion and welcome her memory in Ward 7.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Are there other speakers? Thank you, everybody. Veronica was a friend of mine. My greatest joy was working with her to revive the old Oakville custom that fell away early in the 20th century called Emancipation Day Picnic, where the Black residents of Oakville, who began settling in Oakville before Oakville was officially made a town by the legislature in 1857, used to gather and celebrate Emancipation Day. I would ask that you allow me to consider this a recorded vote, and I'll ask if you have, if there are any objections, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll declare it carried unanimously, and we'll record your names in favor. Any objections? Madam Clerk, the motion is carried unanimously, and you will record the names of the councillors. Thank you. Council, the next item is a motion on 2175 Cornwall Road, which has been a bit of a controversy. And it's moved by me and seconded by Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel. And it reads, whereas applications have been submitted to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing to remove the lands municipally known as 2175 Cornwall Road, the subject lands, from the Minister's zoning order, Ontario Regulation 48.1/73, or the MZO, and remove small portions of the subject lands from the Parkway Belt West Plan. And whereas H&R REIT, operating on behalf of 2121 Cornwall Road Portfolio, Inc., has applied for site plan approval of an expanded parking lot on the subject lands to be used in conjunction with an existing building with an area of approximately 29,200 square meters for the purposes of an Amazon warehouse use. And whereas the application for site plan approval proposes a total of 886 parking spaces, whereas only 188 parking spaces are required for the use of the existing building as an office or warehouse. And whereas the Amazon warehouse use proposed for the property involves a uniquely high degree of activity and traffic, and whereas certain improvements regarding traffic remain under discussion between the applicant and the town, and whereas the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Oakville and members of the public have expressed serious concerns with respect to the impacts of future expansions of the use on the property in a manner that would generate traffic beyond the capacity of the current road network, and whereas certain improvement, oh, I already read it, whereas certain improvements, a little bit of drafting problem there, and whereas it is considered necessary to limit the intensity of the use in accordance with the current proposal, now therefore be it resolved, 1, that the minister be requested to amend Minister's Zoning Order Ontario Regulation 481/73 as applicable to 2175 Cornwall Road to A, permit a building with a maximum gross floor area of 29,200 square meters, and B, and confirm pursuant to Section 47(3) of the Planning Act that the local Oakville zoning bylaw applies where not in conflict with the order as amended. And I'll just briefly explain that the ministry published an advertisement that contained a suggestion that the order would remove all future restrictions from future development of the land, and that was an error, and it caused a lot of concern. And with these two requests, I believe, and the letter that we received from the minister acknowledging the error, I believe we will settle some anxiety. Councillor Haslett-Thiel, would you like the floor?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I would like to say that this is step one. There's a site plan application on this site, and I welcome all of you to take a look at it. It's a bit mind-boggling. And there is an MZO, and this step ensures that the property owner or asks that the minister protect the land from future development, if you will. Probably not the most technical planning term, but and that at least gives us some cause for relief if with the proposed tenant. It does not resolve the anxiety of many of our residents, but it takes us to a place which is important, which is stay within the footprint that you've got. And I would hope that you'd all support it. If this was in your neighborhood, I can assure you, you would lose a lot of sleep.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Elgar? Councillor Elgar?
Thank you very much. I appreciate this coming forward. I guess I would like some answers from staff, because I question whether it's really a Section 41 site plan control issue. I personally believe it's a zoning bylaw Section 34 issue, because in fact, when you go through warehousing at Amazon, if you dig into it, you'll find they have many different levels of warehousing. And this, unless I know differently and staff can confirm, is not warehousing. This is a delivery station, which is the lowest level at Amazon, because in Amazon, they're full fulfillment warehouses. Scarborough, the one they're opening, is 1 million square feet in the fourth quarter of 2020. The one in Caledon is 1 million square feet. The one in Brampton is 868,000 square feet. The one in Brampton is 521,600 square feet. And I know it's 29.2 in square meters, but I personally am questioning whether this is really a warehouse or is this a delivery station? Because if you look at Amazon, it's called the last minute delivery station, where the big trucks come in and then the little trucks go out, spread out like spaghetti throughout the area for the day. And if I look at the E2 versus the E3 zoning, transportation terminal, which I think this is, not a warehouse. I think this is small enough that it's a transportation terminal. So, and that is not allowed in an E2 zone. And from what I can find out, this whole place is an E2 zone where the facility is. So can staff tell me, in fact, that this is not a terminal, which is what, if you go through all the Amazon stuff online, you will see that's what they're calling these delivery stations. It's one at the 6th level, which is the lowest level. So I'm hoping staff can confirm that, in fact, this is for sure a warehouse and not a delivery station where tractor trailers come in, but smaller trucks go out.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Staff have looked into this on multiple occasions, and it comes down to the definitions in our zoning bylaw. The warehouse is defined as a premise for the indoor storage and freight distribution of goods, wares, merchandise, substances, articles, and products, which is essentially what this business is. The transportation terminal itself, the delineation on that is dispatching. So transportation terminal means premises or area of land used for storing, parking, or dispatching of buses, trucks, tractors, or trailers, including servicing or repair within an enclosed building. Although the terminology, I think the issue is the terminology difference used by Amazon or the business itself and different municipalities. In our municipality, warehousing is the term that captures this operation.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can you just also explain who makes the determination whether it's E2, whether it's, I mean, is this the planning staff that decides where it fits in our zoning, or is it the chief building official?
It's through you, Mr. Mayor, it's through the chief building official, falls within his scope.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councillor.
So just for clarity, this does not fit into delivery station whatsoever. So there's nothing being distributed from this location that is going to run around to different housing on a daily basis. This is strictly a cross dock, or is this a warehouse?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as indicated, there will be deliveries from this location, but it will not be by the size of transport trailer type trucks. They will come in, they drop off, much like UPS did, and vehicles will leave the premise, smaller vehicles, which is captured within the definition of warehouse. Again, the transportation terminal is more dispatching transportation, those large trucks from a location, which this is not.
So there will not be large trucks leaving. So this really fits into what Amazon is calling the last mile delivery station, which is not a warehouse. It is not a storage warehouse. It is where things come in, you pick a couple of things and throw them, and away they go to the houses then. That's what it is then.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's our understanding, yes.
Wow. So we really are, this to me is not an E2 at all. I'm sorry. But anyhow, I'll go with whatever the councillors in the Ward 3 are going to do, but I don't see this as being an E2. This is an E3 for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sandu.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I think I just have a couple of questions for staff before I make a decision on this. So I'm just trying to understand the motion a little bit better. In the second and whereas, they're saying that they've applied for site plan approval for the expanded lot and subject land. So do we have the 29.2 square meters and then there's an additional site plan application for additional parking spaces on top of that? Or is it the 29.2 that we're talking about?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, happy to, if you have the answer.
Councillor, the existing building is 29,200 square meters. We're asking the minister to amend his zoning order to permit a maximum building on the site of 29,200. That is, keep it as it is.
Keep it as it is. To not, and I'm sorry, please, apologies for my not understanding, but I'm just trying to make sure I understand completely. So we have the 29.2. If we have the 29.2, would that preclude Amazon's ability to be able to do their work with the 29.2?
They're not applying to, they have not applied to expand the building. They've applied to add parking on top of the minimum required for the site. So no, the minister, in effect, limiting the zoning to the existing size of building would not prevent them from operating.
would be another question on the same vein. So if they're applying only to increase the parking, how does that change in any way the amount of trucks coming in or out?
The amount of parking, the amount of parking applied for is, as of right, within the zoning that has existed on the site for, I think, 30 years. And so the thing that has alarmed the community is the amount of parking, because it implies a lot more truck traffic.
Okay, but
the building is on a truck route.
I guess we don't really have the answer to my question, because that's probably a question for Amazon, quite frankly, and not for our staff or for us to answer. Okay, thank you. That's all I have for now.
All right, thank you. Councillor Knoll.
There we go. I'm having some connection problems. I'm not sure why. Do we have do we have direct knowledge that the additional parking spaces are being applied for to accommodate delivery vehicles or employees?
Councillor, it doesn't matter. Under our zoning,
I understand.
They can have as many parking spaces as they can fit on the property.
Yeah, I understand. I'm trying to understand. I'd like to know how many people this facility is going to employ. It's more of a matter of curiosity than anything.
We'll attempt to get you that information as part of the site plan information, but as you're implying, it's not really part of this motion.
Great. Okay. I know that we're very sensitive about warehouse facilities as taking up our valuable employment lands, but if they're with 868, I think it is, or whatever the number is, parking spaces, it seems like it's more than just your typical, 5 guys and a couple hundred, 1,000 square feet kind of warehouse. So it, again, doesn't apply to this resolution, but I'd like to know that for the future.
Be happy to get that for you. I personally lived through the controversy over the original building of that warehouse back in the early 90s. That was no fun either. Councillor Heslett-Thiel, I see your hand sort of tentatively wanting to go up. Would you like the floor?
So the number of parking spaces is less critical to the community. What is really critical to the community is how this building will operate and their potential to expand. So the reason for this resolution is to try and stop, to maintain a restriction that was already on the land about future development. And so this should, hopefully the minister will listen and accept that, keep the restriction that really was there before, which is they shouldn't be allowed to expand the building or the footprint. And again, I probably didn't use the right planning language, but that's the crux of it. What really goes beyond that for the community is they've coexisted with a warehouse, which was really a warehouse, for over 20 plus years. What is proposed as the new tenant is going to have 450 mini trucks going in and out. 30 mini trucks will leave every minute through 30 minutes. So quickly do the math. You are doing a lot of going in and out on the property. On a street that has kids that, there are kids that come down from Clearview, ride their bike to get to OT. There are kids who ride to go to John Knox Christian School. There's a plaza right there. There's a railroad track. So we have concerns about the traffic study, which the applicant is now going to make a third submission. We have a significant anxiety about the fact that it is not your typical warehouse. I believe that if this had come forward, I agree with Councillor Elgar. I think it is a transportation terminal. It is an E3. It is not an E2. Interestingly, my understanding, and again, there are lots of very smart people who are working on this, and hopefully we'll get to the bottom of it. But Mississauga calls it an E3, and the province defines the definition of the use. And if the province says that if Mississauga calls it an E3 and Brampton uses it as an industrial use and Milton has it as an industrial use, hopefully you can understand why we at least want this resolution to pass so they can't do more than what they already are proposing to do. To literally, you could throw a baseball from the side yard of a house to the Amazon site. And there'll be a lot of cars. And it's not minor, it is major.
Thank you, Councillor. All right, Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. And while I support my council colleagues over here and they're advocating for their residents, the irony does not fall far from me that all of these kids and all of these people, if they're ordering Amazon, then these vehicles are coming from much farther away and they're doing much more damage to the environment by driving further to get over to wherever they're dropping their packages off. So I understand the location. I don't think anyone would ever want to have a location like this in their area, but yet everybody wants the packages from Amazon and everybody wants to try and have less of an environmental footprint and have less of a distance to go and have more packages come in on bigger trucks. So, I guess this is the reason why they're going with the ministerial zoning order, because there wouldn't be a community anywhere in the GTHA who would want this near them, yet we all still continue to get Amazon packages at our door, or the kids do, or whoever it is we're advocating for. So, I'll support my colleagues on this, but I think we need to understand that the same residents who say, no, not here, are also the ones who are propelling this as well and ordering this frenzy, which is Amazon delivering trucks 3-4 times a day. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents out there. Thank you.
Councillor, I'll thank you for your support. May I put the vote? Any who are opposed to the motion? Councillor Elgar? Councillor Elgar? Unmute yourself, Councillor.
Thank you. Mayor Burton, I hear what Councillor O'Meara is saying, and I agree with him, but this is an industrial site. If you go to Milton, you will not find housing across the street. You will find other industrial actual warehouses. This, to me, is a real problem for the people on Chillingham, Cardiff, and Blenheim. I feel sorry for those people. And this is truly, if it's E2, don't have a problem. But this is actually an industrial E3. It's blatant. And I appreciate what you're trying to do to, calm it down a little bit, but it's just plain wrong. I don't believe it should have ever come to site plan. It should have come to council for a proper Section 34 rezoning. I guess wherever the councillors of the ward go, I will support them, but I really think we are really doing the wrong thing in this location. Thank you. And I would like a recorded vote so I see how everybody votes.
Councillor, we will have a recorded vote. May I put the vote? Please show, if you object to the motion, please show a hand. Madam Clerk, there's no objection. Madam Clerk?
Yes. Okay.
There's no objection. The motion carries unanimously. Please record the names in support. Thank you. I wasn't sure what you were looking at there.
I was looking at Elgar. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Council. We now turn to regional reports and question period regarding town boards and advisory committees. Are there any matters any of you would like to bring forward? Seeing none, we have requests for reports. We have one moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Councillor Longo. Councillor Adams, would you like to read and speak to your request for report?
Thank you very much. Maybe first of all, I'll read it so that it's in the public record. I know that my council colleagues have access to it. It reads, whereas the town of Oakville is committed to promoting a culture of inclusion by providing accessible and equitable programs, services, and facilities to residents and employees. And whereas the town of Oakville champions inclusion through increased opportunities and meaningful engagement to support a workplace and community where all feel respected and welcome, that staff report on the implementation of the inclusion audit initiatives already undertaken and further inclusiveness initiatives that can be taken. That staff report on employee demographics, and compare this with community demographics, and a report on initiatives that can be taken to ensure that the employee pool reflects the demographic makeup of the community. That's the request for a report, and I think it speaks for itself. The town of Oakville has had a long history of working against racism and discrimination. In fact, way back in 2007, Oakville became a member of the Canadian Coalition of Municipalities Against Racism and Discrimination. And that's a network, for those who don't know, it's a network of municipalities that want to improve their policies against racism and discrimination, and against exclusion and intolerance. And so this is continuation of the work that Oakville has already begun and continues to work on. And so I look forward to everyone's support on this request.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Would Councillor Longo, the co-mover, like to have the floor before I go to hands that I'm seeing?
Yes, Your Worship. Just to echo what Councillor Adams indicated, I think it's really important, inclusivity and ensuring that we are doing everything we can to encourage that. And it takes all of us to do that. So I think this is a really important report to continue that journey.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sanju, did you have a question?
Not a question, just a comment, Your Worship, if I could, and ask for maybe a small edit. I am happy to support this. I think it's an amazing opportunity for us to be able to move forward in the town. My request would be that everywhere that you include inclusivity or inclusive, I'd also ask you to add in the word diversify or diversity to ensure that it's a wholesome report request.
I have no trouble with that. I think that that's a fine word to use as well.
Thank you. Any others? May I call the vote? If you object to the request for report, please show your hand. Madam Clerk, there's no objection and the report is approved. Now we have a matter to go into camera on, but before we do, I would like a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws, except for bylaw 2020-74, the bylaw to confirm the proceedings of a meeting of council, which we will then have as our very last bit of business after we go into camera for the earlier request. Councillor Lischina moves and Councillor Giddings seconds. And if you object to the bylaws, please raise a hand or show a hand. Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The bylaws are adopted. Now, I have written out the proper resolution to go into camera for the purpose requested by Councillor Hazlet-Thiel. And earlier, Councillor O'Meara indicated that he would second it. I'll read that and you can let me know if you still want to move and second it. That council resolve into a session closed to the public for the purpose of receiving information concerning labor negotiations or employee relations as permitted by the Municipal Act and Council's procedural bylaw, Part 6, 2D. Are you, you're still moving and seconding? All right. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and so that carries. And now we need to rig the virtual meeting for a session closed to the public. Council, would you like a 5-minute bio break while we do the technology? We will recess, and as a matter of fact, I'll be generous, 8 minutes. We will recess till 10 minutes to 6. All right, welcome back. Council has met in a session closed to the public for the purpose of receiving information concerning labor negotiations or employee relations as permitted by the Municipal Act and Council's procedural bylaw. And we're now resuming our public session in order to end this meeting of today. We need a motion to receive the information from the closed session. Councillor Sanju and Councillor Elgar. Show of hand if you object to receiving the information. Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The information is received. And now, if we could have a mover and seconder for the confirmatory bylaw on the proceedings of council. Councillor Adams and Councillor Lischina, it's a double six for that. Any hands against adopting the confirmatory bylaw? Madam Clerk, there are none. The bylaw carries. Council, it's been terrific working with you. Thank you for your time and attention, your great questions, and we are adjourned.